Hello, folks. Welcome to this Monday stream. We are checking out a bunch of prototypes sent in by the community. I am just trying to make sure that the video description has the links in, and I'm going to check if there's a few more on the list that that I've missed out on. So we're looking at a prototype for a game called Amaranth Charter. We're looking at something called Klinge. I'm adding them all to the list now, and I'm doing that so that I remember to put the timestamps on immediately after the video. So you'll see that update in a second if you're on the YouTube. There's 4 games from the, 3 games from the Discord community and 1 other that has come in off the backlog of the games that have sent into Indies Under the Knife. And because we're supposed to be doing a prototype amnesty today, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. I'll explain what that means very soon. We're going to go through kind of a larger amount of games and spend less time on them this time, is the way I would describe it there. Not that one. Sorry, I'm just making sure that I've... Yeah, okay, just making sure that I've got all the ones that I intended to play on the list. Mechrun and Revenant Realms as well. How's everyone doing? Have you got much planned for this week? I am just doing this one big stream on the Monday. Partly because kids are home from school and I need to be flexible and work around them a little bit. Just making sure that I've got everything ready to go on this end. Right, give me one sec. Okay, good to go. There we go. I was just trying to make sure that we fit as much in today as possible, because these are the games that have been marked as sort of prototypes. So some of them, it's going to be something we can get like a feel for very quickly in terms of like what's working well with these games and what's not. Let me just... jiggling some stuff around over there. Okay. So we've got the Amaranth chapter, Klinge, A Big Year, and Guildbreaker. And these are all games that came in from Discord members in the last couple of months that were flagged as prototypes. And then we've got three others that have been. I think Lantaka has been in the waiting list for a very long time. Mech Run and Revenant Realms. So basically anything that looked like it was at that stage. The reason I've done this stream is often I do streams around like a genre or a theme, and the games tend to be a little bit further along so that there's more to talk about, because generally playing like a grey box or something on stream is not as interesting because there's fewer parts to the game to talk about. So then people get discouraged from sending in games that are earlier on in development and that are still in a bit of a grey box prototypey or post jam state. So instead of discouraging that, because we want that occasionally, I've asked people, if you've got games in that stage, send them in. I will do a stream every so often, every couple of months or whatever, which is just dedicated to that, and that's what we're doing today. So just for anyone who's totally new, just to kind of run over what I think of when I think of the word prototype is, it is not necessarily an early build of a game, right? And if you think of what prototyping is, when you try and invent something like a car or anything like that, you are testing out an idea. And in an ideal world where we all had infinite resources and time, prototyping would usually be a practice of making several things and then choosing between them, choosing which one gets to go ahead. Most of us can't do that, but I think we do it in our own way, we just don't do them in parallel, right? So those of you out there who've maybe never committed to finishing a game, but you've made lots of little games during jams and stuff, I think a thing that's always helpful to do is to look back on those and take stock of which of them were good ideas, because sometimes we have 4 games in our recent history and we think the most recent one is the best, but actually it's just the best executed idea, right? And it might be that the first game you tried to make or the second game you tried to make was actually your best idea, but you think it was a bad idea because at the time you had worse skills, so you didn't execute it very well, right? So there's always these two things that we assess when we look at how good something is how well was it executed, i.e. how much skill did you have, and how much potential did the thing have in the first place. And it's very hard when you're making all of these games in linear time as you get better at technology and art and the other sub-disciplines that you need in order to make good games. And then to look back on the games objectively and think, well, actually, the most recent one might be the one that I'm most proud of because it's the best show of my skills. But that game I made a couple of years ago, if I made that now, that would actually be the game that has the best kind of chance of success. So when we're thinking about prototyping, remember it's a test. You're testing an idea, you're seeing if it works, and you can be testing multiple things, right? So my idea of what gameplay prototyping is you're quickly getting a game together to see if it's fun. And that means you're not putting too much time into making sure the code's good, and you're working with the assumption that everything that you make might get thrown away. It is not just I have decided to make this game at some point in the future, and this is version 0.00001, therefore it's a prototype, right? A prototype has to have fail and pass conditions, really. And there's different types of testing. What are we testing? Are we testing if the gameplay is fun, or are we testing if I can build this thing, which is, again, a different type of test. And it's not really game design prototyping at that stage. It's what I would call feasibility testing, right? You're building something to find out if you've got the skills to be able to build a bigger version of that thing. And that's fine as well. You can do that. But if you're giving that to people to play, then you need to work out what you're trying to get from giving it to people to play. Because often I've been given prototypes where it's someone has clearly just followed a tutorial for making a first-person shooter or whatever. And then they're look at my game. And it's well, what are you testing? Because this is just all of the basic functionality of a first-person shooter. What is the actual idea you're testing here in terms of your question of what is fun? And often people, you do a prototype to do feasibility testing. You do a prototype to see, can I make this thing that I want to make? Fine, that's great. But maybe that doesn't need playtesting until you've actually got a unique idea in there, or until there's something about the gameplay that you're not sure about, or there's something that you are sure about and you're excited about and you want to see if other people like it in the same way that you do. But again, that's a different type of test from just, can I do this thing, to say, okay, this thing I've done, how do other people respond to it? And if the thing you've done is just implement the basic features of a game in genre X, then there's not really much there to test, because as someone who has played a video game before, you have a pretty good feeling of whether or not the jump in your FPS feels like a regular FPS jump. And if you don't, then that might be a problem that you just need to actually play the type of game you intend to make. So let's work through these. I'm going to go through the ones submitted from Discord first. Amaranth, and these are all going to be at different stages, because like I said, I'm saying all this because we have very different ideas of what someone means when they say prototype, you know? Like, it can mean very different things. So we're going to see stuff that's all at different stages. Let's check out the Amaranth charter, see if I need to know anything down here. In this prototype, I'm looking to test whether the gameplay itself is fun. Great. We've got a statement of what the prototype is for. That is the combination of its features listed below. Okay. We're doing cards. Features. Hold 1, play 4. Draw 5 cards, deploy 4 to the combat lane, save exactly 1 to set up future combos. Flanking. Fair map guarantee. A unique point budget map generator. Okay, we've got a map generator. We're doing some lane-based combat tactics. Let's try it. Congratulations on winning the tender to the Amaranth Charter. As you know, payment will be given based on the following conditions: that you arrive on time, that you arrive with the goods intact. Okay, so we're doing like caravan guarding, I guess. Hover over unit to read its abilities. On-field Stonewall. When fight begins, argue and all allies on field gain 1 shell. Oh, okay, so I select the whole retinue, and at this moment it's like I can have big turtle, 2 turtle. It's basically the same, but I get the fox or the extra. I'm going to go with the one with the fox. Okay. So when I see a map like this and I've just started playing a game, what I will tend to do is try and go for the route that's just going to take me through the most combat, because I don't care about healing and stuff yet, because I just want to play the core of the game. So we're going to go, I guess, this way, so that we go fight treasure, fight treasure. One thing I will say as well, I'm not, I don't know where you've got this art from, but if you use placeholder graphics that are in a, more advanced or polished style than you're going to be able to achieve on your own, it's really setting yourself up for failure later on in the project. Placeholder art should look like placeholder art. If it looks like polished final art, the problem you're going to have then is when you come to make your own art assets later on, or hire someone else to do it, you're going to have this style locked in your head, and nothing you do is going to feel like it lives up to something. So, you know, draw these guys, make them look like they're from Peppa Pig or something. Or, you know, if you're going to use an asset pack, fine, but then you need to... The thing I always say about assets is use assets whose style you can replicate and modify yourself, because otherwise you're stuck with the rest of your game, you know? Okay, we're gonna have lots of little squealies. We're gonna have a squeal boss. This is all relatively intuitive. We've got like a slash as an icon for how much attack they do, a heart for health. Not sure what this means up here. That's their warrior class. Okay, lots of good implementation of tooltips. You don't need to worry about this at this stage, but it's something to be aware of in general if you're making a game like this. There's a reason why tooltips on card games and stuff tend to fade in over half a second, because when they appear suddenly like this, it kind of pulls your eye towards it, even if you don't need to read it. So something to be conscious of if you're making a similar game. Again, doesn't matter at this stage of prototyping, but something to be aware of. Okay, so we've got lanes. Place characters on the front line to defend caravans. These are our caravans. So it's kind of like we're doing a Hearthstone-y type battle for like control of the center of the board, but rather than the damage getting through and hurting like us as one character at the back of this all, it is separate lanes of caravan that need to be defended. I'm just going to do that so that we can, so the chat doesn't, I'll squish the chat up a little bit today as well. There we go. So yeah, we're trying to defend those purple caravans you can see there. What's this? So we got gold down here. We got 5 days remaining. We've got a consumables area for stuff we don't currently have. See which party units have not been drawn. And then this is a deck. So we've only got the other spike shell is the only thing in the deck that we don't have currently. We've got a banner over here. What does that say? That's okay. Draw, discard. So these are like a deck. Drawing deck, discarding deck. This is who we've currently got. So the boss, I want to put... I'm going to put the Stormstone Scholar in there, because he's going to last at least 2 turns, right? Because he's going to get hit twice for 6 damage and then die. But he'll at least have done half the Squill Boss's damage to him before there. Okay, we'll put a Spike Shell in one of these lanes, because that can just get whomped for 10 turns and it'll be alright. Alina Firestorm over there and an Archer there, and then fight and then see what happens. I see. Okay. So we keep one character between turns. Everyone else gets used and discarded. And then stuff goes back into the deck, but it's got its... Has it lost the health? I think that's the thing that I'm going to struggle with. Oh yeah, so Stormstone Scholar was used last turn, went back in the deck, came back out, and now he's got 2 health because he previously got hit for 5 or whatever. Yeah, these are great. If this is your actual art style, fantastic. It looked too polished for most people to be in a prototype. But if it's your actual art style, great. Okay, so I've got a 5 damage there. I don't know who's gonna... We need to get rid of the guys with Fury, because they're gonna get more powerful. I'm just trying to play this like I would a real game, but also work out how some of the rules are working at the same time. I think it's very normal for units in a game like this to not be animated. But the more abstract you make it, like I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, in something like Hearthstone, they're in a little capsule once they're on the board and they stop being cards, because it helps to explain why they're abstract tokens rather than things that wiggle around. Right, that one's nearly dead, so we might as well finish him off. Let's block the boss with the big guy. I do feel like the decision space here is quite easy to understand, which is a good place to start. You know, like, just from understanding the basics of, like, what the health and attack mean, you can very quickly get to a place where you're looking at it and thinking, okay, units that attack here will perform a flank attack that damages all enemies. Okay, that's an interesting mechanic as well. So if I put someone with the largest damage here, it's going to do that damage to everyone. So I can put a Chew Archer there, and when it gets to their turn, they're going to hurt everyone. So they're going to kill these 2 guys if they haven't been yet, and then they're going to take 2 damage off this guy. So this guy needs that character there to deal the other 2 damage to kill them, and then this one will survive because they've got 6 health and they've got 2 attack. So I like what I see here. This is quite compelling. I think obviously I'm slowing the game down quite a bit by talking quite a lot, but I think I said this in a stream last week. The things I look for in an auto battler, and I know it's not exactly an auto battler because we are doing something each turn, but the thing I'm going to be looking for here is, like, once we get into it and we know the core of the rules, how frequently am I changing my deck and how big do the changes feel? And one of the things that I find interesting is that we've basically started off with, I think it's 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it looks like I don't have... Oh yeah, because someone died, didn't they? Like 5 or 6 things. So the hand you draw each time is going to be reasonably similar. But if we get the chance to add stuff on the run, it's going to become quite like relatively unstable in terms of, because going from 8 to 9 cards is like not the same change in variability as going from like 6 to 7 cards. The smaller the total amount of cards in a deck, the bigger the change one card makes to like the variability when things are coming out. So gonna be interesting to see how that feels. So let's watch True Archer hurt both of those. But I like the kind of asymmetry of having that special flanking rule where you can, if you clear out one space, you can damage everyone. That's quite interesting, and it makes it feel like a single-player game rather than a single-player copy of a two-player game with an AI opponent, which I think if you look at things like Slay the Spire and stuff like that over the years, one of the things that they've done is take a format of game that would normally be played against a human opponent and make it all asymmetrical, because you don't really need another character there playing cards. If you look at the indie games that have done that, it's like Inscription, where the game is much simpler and doesn't need an AI that knows how to play all 10 Hearthstone classes or whatever. Okay, select up to 3 rewards. Unit gains 2 base shell, a consumable. Is that permanent? Does it gain it for the whole of that combat? So in terms of like thinking of what the sort of easy wins in this game would be, that that would make it kind of stronger for me on the whole, I think the sooner you can get into like putting color coding in these tooltips so that we can have, like, you know, when the word attack appears, it's yellow or whatever, or certain keywords have certain colors, or, you know, maybe the word consumable has a color. It's going to make all of this information a lot easier to pass, because the rules you've got here aren't super complicated, but it's just much quicker to like understand these things. We can give someone Fury, give someone a better base power. I'm going to put the base power up on one of these spike shells, and then put an absorption up on Alina, so that's like, I think that shell is like similar to like a bubble shield, so it just blocks the full amount of 2 attacks, and it makes sense to put it on someone who's like low health, high damage. So this isn't like an auto battler where we get everyone back after a fight. We just keep going and we lose people and get them back. So it's a bit more like playing through a Final Fantasy Tactics type RPG in a run-based format. Barbed arrows. Wielder gains first strike. Mark wielder's opponent's enemy with Hunter's Mark. Let's put that on this one. So are some of these like class dependent, so they need to go on a ranger or a warrior or a mage? Not sure. Yeah, I mean, having the project context of understanding that Evil Art Bunny actually draws these makes me like potentially a lot more excited for this game, because games like this do need quite a lot of content in terms of they're unit based, right? They are about having lots of these units, these pawns, both in terms of what the player can collect and strategize around and what's out there to fight. And if you have like a internal studio structure, whether that's just you or like the people you're working with, where you do have the capacity to draw your own monsters and edit them easily and recolor them, right? Like we can have a red snortle that shows up later on with like a couple more attachments on. Then you've got some of the ingredients for a game like this. And one of the things you need to do in pre-production on your games is like obviously test the game, make sure it's fun, but also think about, if I needed to make a much bigger version of this with 10 times as much stuff, how am I setting myself up for success or failure based on what I can do and what this has shown? And like, given that these are actually art produced by the developer, that's putting you in a strong position, because like someone said they don't animate. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. You can either go down the routes of making them feel more like cards and tokens and like bashing them into each other, or you could like, you know, have them on a fake 3D thing and like slightly squash and squeeze them and bash them together or something. But I think people that play turn-based tactical games are reasonably open to that kind of thing, but you do need stuff like things bashing together. And I mean, if you look at the way the RPG Maker systems do this, they have little like slash animations and stuff that show up just, you know, we might have a cast animation on a character and then a impact animation on the thing they're attacking and stuff like that. But there is a workflow for making a game like this that doesn't require you to animate all of these characters, you know? Okay, let's fight some more squeals. Squeals and snortles. Squeal boss, who's going to go for you? This is the guy that puts Hunter's Mark on a character, so we want to put that on the boss. Rangers will target units with Hunter's Mark, so I can put that there, and that means that in future rounds, this ranger will target that one regardless of which lane they're in. Dum, and fight. So one UX thing I think you're going to need in this game. So the Chew Archer is the character we're holding behind for the next round, right? I think maybe having something to show that they're going to wait and not get discarded would be good. I think, remember, like the weirdest part of your game is always going to be the bit that needs the most explanation. So there's lots of stuff here that we can understand from other games, that we can understand from Hearthstone, or what's the other one? Frost something that's like indie Hearthstone. But the fact that we play 4 characters, we hold one, and they kind of cycle through the deck is a little bit confusing. So that's going to be where you really need to like build up the metaphors and everything that explain that. Okay, so the boss now has... Oh, the boss doesn't have Hunter's Mark. I thought I put Hunter's Mark on him. Or maybe there's more than one. Right, I'm going to put the Chew Archers here and here so that they don't get hurt too much, because these guys only do 1 damage. I'm going to let the Spike Shell deal with the boss for a moment, and then we're going to take that Snortle out with our mage. Squeal boss. Let's let the Tortoise Shell deal, the Spike Shell deal with that first. Not doing so good this time. I feel like we might be close to getting wiped out. But I guess you can just let them take a wagon at some point. Yeah. The Hunter's Mark was a little bit confusing. But also, I don't have enough rangers for it to mean anything now. Oh, lost 2 wagons. So, for some reason, my brain kept querying who attacks first, but basically, unless they have the first strike ability, they attack each other at the same time, which is the same as Magic the Gathering, so I don't know why I thought it worked differently here. So I think one of the potential problems here is because we're playing a game that is based on collectibles, but when you've got 2 of them, you're kind of automatically a bit screwed. So one of the things I think you should be thinking about as you work on this further is how do we resolve the slow loss problem, right? So the slow loss problem, I talked about this a little bit on our episode of One More Run where we played Bad North, because I think it's a problem there. It's also classically a problem in Monopoly, especially when people house rule it, is that Like, a really bad state for a game to get into is a situation where a player knows they're losing and the remaining amount of time that they have to play the game until they lose is quite long, right? And this can lead to situations like what people used to do in RTS maps where, you know, someone just runs around the map with one little character surviving just to wind up and troll the other player. But it's why we have conceding in duel-based games. It's also why we have stuff like in Call of Duty games. They reward the winning players with things like airstrikes so that they can finish the match off quicker, right? It seems unfair, and at base it is, to like give the team that are already winning a further mechanical advantage. But the purpose of it is to avoid that very long end game state where someone is losing and knows they're losing, right? So if we can speed up the end of a game when someone is losing, we end up in a better position. And I think one of the things that this structure of game is going to struggle with is that issue of like the long loss. So I'm going to keep playing as if I want to win, right? Just to test this properly. But at this stage of the game, if I was playing this normally, I would want to quit if I was down to 2 units when the game is so heavily geared around needing to defend all those lanes every turn. I would maybe be thinking along lines of maybe you do get your units back after each combat like you would in a classic auto battler like Dota Underlords or Hearthstone Battlegrounds or something like that. They come back after each, but maybe there's something that weakens them. So you do need to collect other units because every time a unit dies, they get like a little curse or something when they come back. I'm not sure, but I think the long loss of gradually getting your team whittled down, it makes thematic sense, but I'm not sure it's going to not lead to these bigger potential problems. Okay, now we've got an even harder battle, but we've only got 2 guys. And I know at this stage it feels like I'm like criticizing something that we're not at the right stage of the game to criticize yet, because basically I'm talking about balancing and I'm saying, oh, the game's too hard. And it's like, well, yeah, it's a prototype. It's going to be too hard. It hasn't been balanced. But it's not necessarily about balance. I'm not complaining that the game is too hard because I want to win. I'm trying to highlight a potential problem that's going to come up if the game isn't designed so that you either like take small chips of damage over a long period of time or get wiped out very quickly, right? Right, let's give it one more go. I'm going to go with the top team this time. So what are folks saying? Claro said the effects of the discard draw mechanic seems minimal so far without more fighters in the deck. Yeah, it's kind of like we do need a bigger deck to test the concept. Hey, Becca Draw, welcome. Merlord said XCOM mechanics would be cool here where you have rookies and throw into the meat grinder and your favorites you keep alive and make stronger and stronger. Nate said, I think another common approach is coming back around every round but multiples of the same unit combine into a stronger version. Yeah, that's kind of the classic, you know, like auto battlers are very mechanical and they're not like trying to tell a thematic story. So you can do stuff like, oh, you get 2 level 1 units and they become a level 2 unit, and you get 3 level 2 units and they become a level 3 unit. This feels a little bit more like it's trying to go for a naturalistic story where it is representing an actual party of units going through the forest. But yeah, I do think for a fair test of the game, we should have a way of playing it where you have like 12 units in the deck or something, because the variety of what comes out each turn is quite reduced. And the thing is, as soon as you've lost one of these guys, you're down to the randomness basically meaning nothing because we're drawing the same cards every turn. Okay, I'm going to go with the top group this time and do one more try with it. That's a brutal battle. That's an elite battle, basic battle. Mercenary camp. Okay, so there might also be a case that we just need to like force players through mercenary camps because they give you more units. So this time I'm going to go this route so that we get a chance to add to the deck a bit. But you know, think of in Slay the Spire, you always get a card after every combat. In Rogue Book, it works a bit differently because you've got a big open map that you can wander around and do stuff on. But when you do find cards on that map, you use gold for them, and it's quite easy to potentially add like 3 cards to your deck at the same time. So think about the frequency with which the party that you're making changes, because if that frequency is higher, then players will feel less bummed out by losing 1 unit, and also they'll feel more like leeway to experiment a little bit with their loadouts. And both kind of traditional digital deck builders like Slay the Spire and auto battlers like Underlords and stuff, they are fundamentally engine building games. Whether that engine is a deck of cards or a bunch of stuff that fights on its own, if you have more frequent chances to modify that and see how it works in a different, then people are going to be happier because they're getting to do the strategic layer of the game more often. Okay, so in this fight, I'm going to put my Stoneweaver in front of the boss because he's got the most health. And we're just going to block 2 of the Snortles and then put an archer on the last one. I do like that your starting decks have like 2 archers and 2 tanks in. So we've got kind of like a boss, 2 archers, 2 tanks, and a mage in both of the starting decks. I like the fact that you've got some duplicates. It helps to make it clear which things are like... It helps it makes it easier to understand the kind of roles of the characters we're putting on the table. If it was like every single one was different, I would find that a little bit of a barrier to learning this game. But I found it very, very quick to learn the basics of what we're trying to do here. Yeah, they do gain a new shell each turn, so we can just keep popping them on there. Take that one out, and... Oh, Argu gives everyone else... Gives all the allies a field. There we go. I think Argu is maybe a bit broken, though, because they're going to... Every time I play Argu, everyone's going to be invincible for that turn, right? So I can put Stormstone Scholar there, who should die, right? Because Squirrel Boss should kill them. But Argu is going to give them a shield, so they're going to last the round. I think Argu might be broken, you know? I didn't put anyone in the flanking position, but I didn't need to. I think Argu might be OP. Let's make him even more OP. Okay, so Mercenary Camp. This is who I've got. This is who I'm hiring. Okay, because we've got Argu and he can give everyone a shield, I'm gonna get as many of the mages as we can. Can I sell anyone back? I can't. Okay. Because the mages do quite a lot of damage, so if I can put a shield on them, then we're... Okay, so we always play Argu if we've got a chance. Then highest damage goes down on one of these to get rid of them. And then the other 2 may as well be the 2 damage ones, because they're going to get shielded anyway. Yeah, I think the shell that Argu gives everyone is going to be overpowered, because basically every turn you play him, your team doesn't take any damage. So, if I make the deck bigger, there's a chance I won't draw him every turn, but even then, the effect of drawing him on 1 turn is just too powerful. Ah, okay, cool. So it's not a total block. That's fine then. I'm going to keep using him though. He's doing good so far. So the shield gives 1 like bonus health to this one, which means they've got 4, which means the Squirrel Boss won't take them out this turn, but they will take out the Squirrel Boss. Chew Archer there, Chew Archer there. Good to go. Yeah. Argue's not as OP as I thought it was. Still pretty good, though. Okay, now we're going to heal one of our scholars. Let's give someone Fury. That sounds fun. Let's give the Chew Archer Fury. And 2 base shell. Let's put it on that scholar. And see who else we can hire. Let's just get another archer, I think. And go into the brutal battle. Okay. We got lots of extra pigs. Pigs with shield. A Wrathstone Warlock who is currently an orb. A Mud-Tongue Boar. Quite a varied deck we're playing against this time. Okay. Let's hold the little guys with the spike shells. Take that Warlock out if we can. And put Stoneweaver over there. Gonna lose one of my scholars this time. The character loss isn't so bad this time around because we've gone the route where we've gone through 2 mercenary camps and we've been able to stock up before we get into trouble. Okay, Stoneweaver, put you there so you're not going to lose any health. 1 second. Sorry about that, just getting spam calls from blockchain support team, whatever that is. Not anything that I need to have a call from. Scholar there to take out the Warlock. Spike Shell there to do some absorption. And then I guess we still need to protect this one, so we'll put the Archer with the most health over by the Plate Pig. So yeah, strongly advise if you're making a game like this that is like a strategy or tactics game and is turn-based, when you are organizing your own playtests and asking people to check it out for you, whether you're watching the playtest or asking them to record themselves or whatever, do encourage people to sort of think out loud. Because I'm thinking out loud partly so because that's how streams work, but it kind of gives you an insight into whether the game is doing what it needs to do, right? Because fundamentally, people play these games to think, and you'll catch things where the player doesn't understand how a rule works, right? Like we just had that a moment ago, where I thought that the stacks of shell were like a full damage absorption when they're not. They're just 1 extra armor that goes away like health does. You'll catch things like that, but also you'll be able to see if your game is doing what the genre needs to do, which is to give people something to think about. And that's what people go to these games for, right? I think you could probably say the same thing with any playtest, really, is like, whether you're making a strategy game or a puzzle game or an action game or story game, whatever, is it eliciting the type of response I want it to? Which in this case is like someone thinking about where they put things. And trying to predict the outcome as well. So right now, I'm not feeling so great. I'm seeing like there's a couple of lanes where I can kind of deal with what's out there, but I don't have much damage output at the moment. And I think if I look at my deck, yeah, I've lost all of my big hitters because the mages in this are kind of like the glass cannons. And I've lost my mages. And I'm not feeling too good about my prospects here, but we do have a lane where we can squish people now. So let's put Stoneweaver in that lane, because Stoneweaver is going to block that one okay. This one does 6 damage, so we want to put the Turtle Spike Shell there. This one is going to get 1 layer of shield. They're going to die, but I need to put them there because I need the Chew Archer to go there, because then they'll deal 2 damage to everyone else. The flanking rule doesn't make much thematic sense of like why do they get to damage everyone. But it's a really interesting little bit of mechanical crunch. Okay, who needs healing most? Give it to the archer. Give Argu a bigger base power, and maybe an extra bit of shell on the spike shell that's better, that's kind of in a better place to survive longer. Wielder gains sweep attack. Attack adjacent opponents. Bloodstone. When wielder takes lethal damage, transfer damage to a random ally on the field. Wielder's in-hand abilities trigger twice. In-hand abilities. I don't think I have any in-hand abilities. Okay, we're going to give the sweep attack to the... I'm going to put it on the spike shell. I don't want to put all of my eggs in one Argu-shaped basket. Okay. Argu, you need to stop whoever is the biggest, stinkiest person on the field. You go there because they're doing the most damage. Spike Shell, you're going to get sacrificed. And... oh, no, actually, you get sacrificed to the Plate Pig, and the Chew Archer can go there. I mean, I think another thing you could maybe try is if players had like a base minion type, and when their deck is reduced, they draw those to fill the empty slots, right? So this could be a good theming thing, because you could have like at the start of the game you could choose a particular faction or character or whatever. So maybe depending, if I choose the Argu Stoneweaver character as my leader, then when I'm in a situation like this when I can only draw 4 cards, the 5th space gets summoned up like a little turtle minion that I can use. But I guess then the issue is that I'm never going to like deliberately leave a lane open, so maybe that breaks the game as well. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's kind of weird, the cycling of the deck with such a small amount being the kind of standard. I guess the game does need either the player or the opponent to get down to less than 4 at some point. Otherwise, you can just always put something in a slot. It's a weird design problem, and I don't really know what your solutions are going to be. Okay, now we have to leave one lane open. This guy hurts everyone, but has a lot of shield, so I'll put them against the Plate Pig. Argu... oh, I don't want Argu to die, so Argu over there and Chew there. We're going to lose 1 caravan this turn. This guy's going to kill this guy because of his... oh no, it's only adjacent ones. Doesn't attack everyone, it attacks adjacent ones. I knew that, I don't know why no, actually. I'm going to put Stoneweave... if I put Stoneweaver on the first one, then when it does flank, it's going to kill all of them, and hopefully we won't take any more damage. Yeah. But there's a good core of a game here. I'll move on to the next game now because I'm getting too into this. There's a good core of the game. There's going to be design problems to deal with in terms of like the progression, and so any of these run-based games where you're building whether it's like a character that you're putting projectiles on in a bullet heaven or a card-based game, any sort of run-based game that is based around engine building, you want to make it so that very soon into the run, it can potentially feel different from the previous run. You know, if I choose the Argue deck 2 runs in a row, there's a branch in my sort of strategic decision making quite early on that lets me pick a character or an upgrade that is going to make the run feel different from the previous run, right? It's called run identity. You don't need to solve that now, but whatever direction you take this in, you need to keep that in mind because that's what people get out of these games. I do also think that you've got an interesting thematic thing here with protecting caravans getting to places. And one of the things you could consider, because basically you've got two fail conditions or 2 big health bars here. It's like the player doesn't want to lose all their characters, and the player doesn't want to lose all their caravans. But maybe there's a version of this where you do 3 fights and then the caravans are dropped off at a little town and you get a reward based on how many caravans you got through, and then you get 4 more caravans and you take them to the next town. So don't like settle for this game structure just because it's familiar. Obviously, the more you deviate from existing games, it's the reason why we have these in so many games, is because we know it works, right? And whenever you can copy a design pattern, you sort of loosely know how it works. Doesn't mean it necessarily works in your game that you're making, but it does make things easier because you kind of know how that works. But for example, if you look at something like, you know, Into the Breach is a run-based game, but it doesn't do that challenge tower approach. Because what Into the Breach does is you play one of these little countries or continents, you play a certain amount of the levels in it, you have to defend the power grid on that, which is kind of like the hull of your ship in FTL. It's your overall life, regardless of the life of your mechs. And then you move on to the next one, and you have to play through a certain amount of these to like finish the game. So don't be too wedded to that node map, because even though the node map is like helpful in a lot of instances because people already understand it, I think you've got something interesting with the theme of transporting the wagons. And I think if you could make it so, if you could make a game structure where, you know, we've got this set of characters between like 6 and 12 characters, maybe you do need to test it with more to start off with just to see how it works. I don't know. We've got this set of characters, they're transporting the 4 wagons, maybe just like 4 or 5 stops. And then if they get through all of those stops and none of the wagons have been destroyed, they get loads of reward. If they've got, you know, 2 destroyed, they get something different. And then you get your wagons restocked and you go and you do another leg. That could be an interesting structure. And I think the kind of implied story that comes from that very much fits this slightly more kind of cozy animals in a wood kind of theming you've got. But again, you know, to kind of weigh it up, everything I'm suggesting is more experimental than just going the route of having a node map. But you do have to think about like what that gets you. I think a node map, from just like a vibes point of view, feels like you are conquering, you know. That some games have it like the map in FTL is you running away, right? You're being chased by the kind of evil baddies across the map and you're running away. And the Bad North one is similar. You know, you're running away from the Vikings that are swooping in from the left and killing everyone on all of the islands. Which can be a thematic, I think, if you're trying to present it as like scrappy little characters surviving in a hard world, rather than Slay the Spire, which is like, I'm going to climb this tower and beat up everyone in it, then thinking about how you present the node map and what it represents can be helpful as well. But I do think you've got something interesting there about a slightly more cozy animal fantasy world where your heroes aren't like big superhero adventurers saving the world. They are just protecting caravans from place to place. And I think if you made that caravan protection less of just a health bar and more ingrained in the overall structure of the game, that could be like something really interesting. So I'm just going to get the password for the next game on the list, which is called Klinge, which I'm going to... I don't know what type of word that is or where it comes from. This is... okay, we're going for the feeling of a ninja slashing through enemies, hand on the sword, one short flash, and every enemy is split in half. The player sets up a combo, hook an enemy, slash through them, push another into a wall. Okay, so we're doing a samurai slashy type action game, but there's a draw a path mechanic. Okay, let's see what this is. So I haven't put a link on the description for this one because it's passworded. Click and hold on the player with the left mouse button while holding drag mouse in direction of an ability to trigger it. Drag it further to move to the tile. Release the left mouse button. Okay, so we're just doing all click and drag based stuff in this to do slashy stuff. Okay, I saw this before. Okay, so this is our character. These are the enemies we need to deal with. These are the abilities we have. So we click and drag to an ability and then drag to the character we want to do it on. Ah, I see how this works, but I think I need an undo already. Sort of doesn't... I'm not very clear how this works. Okay, I'm going to go back again. Click and hold on the player with the left mouse button. While holding drag in the direction of an ability, drag it further to move to the tile. If there is an enemy, you bounce off and continue path. Otherwise, it will end your turn. Okay. So if I click and drag here, I can use the bow. Does that mean I can then go... Yeah, I don't understand what's happening with this set of interactions. Okay, click to attack. I don't understand what's happening here at all. Okay, restart. So there's kind of multiple things here that are fighting with each other. I can't really read what that is. That may be a switch place with them. So if I click that and select that ability and go there, is it going to swap my place with them? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, don't know what that symbol means then. No way of knowing that because we don't have tooltips or anything. I can go there, do attack. I'm feeling a lot of Shogun Showdown in the way that the pixel art is here and the way that these are presented like they're little tiles or something, but okay. Okay, so that's showing the outcome of the move. So that's me doing like some big pushing attack that throws them over there. That's me doing an arrow that goes over there. Let me read it again. Drag it further to move to the tile. Okay, so that's it. It's basically we've got abilities that are randomized so we can only do them in a certain order or we can move. I think that's it. I think having the direction that the abilities fire in randomized is a little bit too much because in this situation there's only one thing I can do. I don't understand what the other abilities are. So you've just got too many UX problems stacked on each other for this to be a helpful playtest at this stage, right? Because I think your instructions are missing quite a lot. Click and hold on the player with the left mouse button while holding drag mouse in direction of an ability to trigger it. So there's an assumption that the player will understand something here, which is the ability fires in the direction of the hexagonal side it's on, which makes sense. There's something reasonably intuitive about it. But in a situation like this, where I've started on a map and there are 6 directions and there's only one I can go in, you've basically given me a situation where the randomization means I only have one option, right? So there's a structural problem there in terms of how the randomness is how the randomness is working. But you also have an information problem of like, it says drag in the direction of an ability to trigger it. There are only 2 abilities on this list that are in any way intuitive, right? I understand what a bow is. I understand what a sword is. I don't understand what any of these other things is. That one is to hook people and pull them towards you. Okay, but the direction is randomized. So do I only have a 1 in 6 chance that's going to be facing this guy at the time I need it to be? You know, you've got too much randomness stacked on to each other that doesn't make the game more interesting for the player, and too many abilities where we don't have a quick idea of what they are. So I can kind of intuit that that's going to be a hook, because there we go. I can hook that person. I can slash that person. Slightly better situation this time. And I can go back here. And now I've got this in this direction. Again, I don't know what that is. Is it swap sides with them? I can attack that one. I think you maybe have just too much variety of stuff here for people to learn it initially as well. But it doesn't help when the direction is randomized and then the level is quite restrictive in how much space there is. I could see it being that there's the core of a good idea here. There is the core of a good idea here, but I think if you want this to be testable, you need to tell people what these do, because they're not intuitive enough to just have them as icons. I'm trying to move and it's not letting me now. So now we've got a level that we just can't do because we're on a different island from them and I can't use my bow. But yeah, I can't really play this for much longer because it's like we've got multiple problems. We've got a communication problem of what do the abilities do, and then the position of the randomness in the overall design is just such that you very often hit points in the game where you can't do anything. And I can't, because I can't understand every element of the game, it's very hard for me to judge whether I'm stuck because of the game or whether I'm stuck because of myself. What it seems to be is there's an attack that way and attack that way, right? So I also think maybe you've put too much level randomization in the game early on. Like if this was my project, I can see what you're going for. I really like, I like things like Hitman Go where you're taking like an action, or I never got around to playing John Wick Hex, but I imagine it's the same thing where you're taking like an action sequence, like a cinematic action sequence, and rather than presenting it as a series of action reactions, you're like asking the player to choreograph. And actually, one game that was an action game that really evoked that for me was Hotline Miami, because Hotline Miami sort of encourages you to think a bit like a speedrunner. You do have to think on your feet, but you play the same level lots of times and you end up building this like mental map of like, I go in there, I throw that thing at them, I go in there and da-da-da, and you usually end up like building this kind of speedrunner mentality of like doing the same thing each time. So it feels much more like you're choreographing something rather than reacting, which is very much in line with what makes like samurai movies and like kung fu movies fun and cool, is like this real sense of, someone like exactly what the dev described in their notes that I read at the start of like how they want this game to feel. I think if you really want to test that, stop randomizing the maps, make 10 bespoke maps that are set up as a little puzzle that you slash through in a particular way. And then I think yeah, I mean, kind of what you just said, having melee attack with tank-based controls would be interesting. I think that's kind of what I was thinking. So if the character has a facing direction, right, and then they have a slash that goes out either way, which I feel like that's kind of what you were going for here. But part of the problem is because it's hexes, it's like we're facing down here, so if the character was facing this way, right? And then that one was a slash that way, that one was a slash that way, and that one was like a kick that pushed an enemy backwards. And then maybe to go back, if we went back, it did the hook shot and stuff like that. And we could like gradually move from space to space. But because you've put it in a randomly generated map as well as having the symbols generated in a random order, there's too many types of randomness operating on top of each other. And it doesn't make the game learnable, even if I work around the fact that I don't understand what this symbol or this symbol are. It's not something I could get better at, right? And you're asking people to practice a skill and get better at it. It doesn't seem to be much I can do to get better at this game. And it does actually look like the symbols are in the same place every time. So is that turnaround? Is that what we're doing here? It's just too confusing. It's kind of what I said in the last game. The kind of risk reward trade-off for doing something strange and unusual is much higher, right? So when I was talking about the node map in the previous game, if you do something different from Slay the Spire, if you don't automatically go to a node map with little skulls and campfires on it, you're taking a risk. But the payoff, if you do that well, could be bigger, right? It's in that game, that's a potentially worse place to take a risk because it's like in the longer part of the game, it's harder to immediately tell what the impact of changing that like big long-term structure of what an hour-long run is like. But the potential reward for doing something different and getting it right is a lot higher, and that's why you get like games which are trendsetters and games which are trend followers, because the trendsetters are the people who make something like Balatro, where really they don't really care about any other game and they just make the best version of the game they're trying to make, and that requires like drawing in insights from all of the different types of games. You know, if you watch read any interviews with the Balatro dev, and he says like, I didn't play any deck builders. I just was like, how can I make a game out of poker that is like an interesting single player game? And that was like the driving philosophy behind that game. And to get that right, you have to be able to like pull things from other games and see what function they're performing in that design. But the trade-off, the payoff for doing that can be very, very high, and that's why you know, everyone's like, we want to make the next Balatro, and it's like, well, are you working like that dev worked? Because that dev didn't work by thinking, I want to make the next blah, 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 and then kind of copying that thing. This game has the same thing. It's like a micro level where everything in this game is quite unique and unusual, and that means it could be very, very good. But you have to approach all of these problems of like, which parts of your game are weird, and how do you make sure that the player understands the weird parts of your game? If all of the parts of your game are quite weird, I mean, like fighting on a grid isn't that weird, right? But the kind of click, drag, select an ability, and then you don't really control where the abilities are, and they're locked to a direction, that's quite weird. And yeah, just too many types of stacked randomness that make it hard to even do a fair test of the game. Because I think you could probably make a few pre-made levels of this and get the player like moving through them and feeling quite competent. Mostly my experience of this is getting beaten up by the game and not knowing how to get better. And I think the level creation is kind of causing that a little bit for me as well, because it's very frequently putting me in situations I can't win. So yeah, I mean, if your game is regularly throwing up situations that seem unwinnable, make sure you resolve that before you ask lots of people to playtest it, or they're all going to just tell you the same thing. You know, a big year. Can you find all the birds in a year? Please enjoy exploring the area in and around Fox Creek and let me know your honest thoughts. Most of the mechanics are implemented to some degree. There needs to be some balancing and smoothing of some mechanics like earning money and gift giving. The only planned mechanic not implemented is the ability to customize your home and yard. Okay, so we're going to see like a relatively large amount of stuff. I don't know how long we'll be able to check this out for. We are doing a kind of top-down life sim game that is about birding and spotting birds. What I like about this from the get-go is the theme constrains the scope of the game, right? If you said, oh, I'm going to make a game like Stardew Valley, but it's not going to have any farming in, that would ring alarm bells for me. But there is some of that Stardew Valley-ness here, but because of the role we've given the player, I'm immediately not expecting to be having to like plant crops and stuff like that because we're there to do a specific thing. Okay, so we're going to move with WASD. Hey, Mr. Pretzel, we're going to interact with E. Tab, Shift, mouse wheel. Okay, cool. Let's see how this goes. Okay. Let's do the tutorial. I mean, I will say, once you've got a tutorial, your thing is probably not a prototype anymore. You can be prototyping parts of it, but I think once you get to a stage where you're building tutorials are like a launch feature. You need a way to teach people the game in your game early on when you're playtesting, but it doesn't really need to be in the format of like what you would use in the final game. So I always advise people not to do like dialogue-driven, sort of polished final game tutorials early into building a game because you can't teach what you don't know your player doesn't know. And you need to do your playtesting in order to work out how to teach your game before you build a tutorial. So always kind of a little bit wary when I see that. Hello, I'm here to teach you how to go birding. Look, that tree is shaking. I bet there's a bird in it. A massive bird. A really rambunctious bird is in that tree. Let's see if we can get close enough before the bird flies away. Let's do it. I'm going to identify it. A few birds can be identified just by their shape, but most share their shape with other birds in their family. Here we go. That's how Downey talks now. We need a better view. I'll do my best Attenborough for Downey. This is not a great name, by the way. This has a slang meaning that is basically a slur. I don't know if that's used outside of the UK, but I would. I get how it relates to birds and feathers, but it's not. It's in the UK. This would be close to having a character named the R slur. So bear that in mind because I'm not going to say his name anymore because it makes me feel uncomfortable. Let's move closer. I mean, it's a slur. It's used in the UK for someone with Down syndrome, and then it's used interchangeably with the R slur. So if you were like a very politically incorrect teenager in a school and you wanted to call your friend, tell your friend they were stupid, you would call them that, right? I'm thankful it's not an international one, but yeah, it's hard for me to read because of that. We need to sneak up on the bird while it's not looking at our direction. This is a great idea for a mini game, for a bird watching game. We're doing red light, green light with a bird. And you can see it's got a little bit of a tell. It kind of shakes before it turns around. The bird will shake for just a moment before it turns around. Make sure to stop before it turns. Ah! Okay, find another one. We're going to move closer. Okay, this is... Oh, I keep moving prematurely before they've turned the other way. Squidburb. Oh. So I'm not always a big fan of games where we like move around a lot and then we get a mini game that requires us to press one button. I kind of hate fishing mini games for that, but there's something very this feels really thematically appropriate for what the game is about. Because what you're doing is you're taking a hobby that lots of people might not do in real life or have had the chance to do, and you're making a mini game that is like what people expect. Obviously, it's cartoonish and it's an oversimplification, but sneaking up on a bird to see what it is. It's a... This is very intuitive to like what non-birders would imagine birding is, right? I can't move any closer. Oh, I think the tutorial got broken there. Because I can't press anything again, and the tutorial came up twice when it shouldn't. Right. Again. Tutorials are launch features. They are not something you need to put in a game this early on. Okay, well, I'm going to ignore the tutorial then, because the tutorial broke on me, so... Excellent. Amazing. I'm gonna go for... Is that like a... Is there a mullet? There's like a mullet. I'm gonna go with the mullet. Let's do the Bob Ross. Bobathy. Tutorials are hard to create, but also you shouldn't create one until you've tested. Like, tutorials are something you build after you've tested your game lots of times with lots of different people, and you know what people need to know, and you're getting ready to like sell the game. I don't think each prototype should have tutorials in them. You should have like helper features, like, you know, when we go to a mini game, put the instructions in the corner of the screen telling people how to play the mini game. My tiny house with the Mondrian in it. I could go outside and look at birds, but why, when I can look at my lovely Mondrian? Let's go and find some burbs. Hello, I'm Harold Downey, your new neighbour. Do you ever birdwatch? Only to make sure they aren't being shady. Ha ha ha. Seriously, it is a lot of fun. This wing index will help you keep track of all the species you learn and see. Some people try to see all the birds in 1 year. They call it a big year. Lots of people around here can help you learn new birds. My favourite is the common-crested chiff. Happy birding. There we go. There he is. Time seen 0. I've seen him there. He's in their book. Hang on, when I was talking to you, all the trees were going, and now they've stopped. Hello. Some sort of woodpecker. This is a great mechanic. This is such a good representation of the theme without like overcomplicating it or filling it with like jargon or trying to turn it into a full simulation, you know? What happened? It was not a common crested chiff. A chiff is like that. He's got a little Mohican on. He's that blue guy from Guardians of the Galaxy. I like to imagine that what just happened was I snuck all the way up to the bird in the tree, and then I shouted. There's like this beautiful woodpecker in the tree, and I shouted, "Common-chested chiff," in its ear, and it flew off. Bird ID. Ladderback woodlancer. That's what I saw. It was one of those, I think. Although I bet there's going to be a few that have exactly the same silhouette and then different colorings. This is reminding me a bit of very hard to talk about game design without quoting Sid Meier for over and over again, but you know, he's just been around a lot and has had a chance to poison the well of every game designer's mind. One of the things that Sid Meier said about like when he makes games about history or pirates or whatever, is that he does the research for the thematic content in like the kids book section of the bookshop, like the Dorling Kindersley and stuff. You like simplify the thing down to make it playable because that abstracts it to a level where it's playable. And I feel like this mini game is a really good example of that because it's what non-birders imagine. It's like a cartoonish, exaggerated version of what non-birders imagine birding would be. You know, just like physically sneaking up on the bird. Okay, the raspid looks like a crow, but it has a yellow beak and feet. I might actually learn some birds today, guys. Unless we kind of finally, you know, towards the end, learn that these are all fake birds. But then all birds are fake, aren't they? That's... put here by the government. Like, I'm not saying I would ever like a game where I have to just wander around looking for trees wobbling, but the theme does help to justify that kind of slightly Pokemon format of like wandering around until you see the grass wiggle or whatever. It's probably not enough to make that interesting, but the theme at least provides the constraint that makes it make sense that that's what the game would mostly be, you know? I think we would want some ways to like manipulate things, like setting up lures or, you know, being able to build some kind of bug habitat in an area so that the trees are more likely to attract certain types of birds and stuff. But I guess that's not how birding works, right? You don't manipulate the environment, you just go out and find stuff. But from a game perspective, that can make things difficult because suddenly, oh, we can zoom out, that's good. Suddenly it's like, well, the bit of the game I have control over is the what do I do when I find a bird. So how do we make the looking around for birds in the first place part of the game interesting? Because I think you're... Okay, there we go. We've got a bird. Or a bird singing over there. It's stopped moving now. So we're looking for opportunities to run up to a tree and press E. But how do we make sure that the game isn't just mostly wandering around looking for something shaking, you know? Like at some point, the player's going to have enough knowledge to know that they should go and look in different places. Okay. Listening to the bird is a rhythm game. Wonderful. Yeah, obviously this could be more polished, but it's a great idea. I think that's a very good way of... So each time we spot a bird, we have an opportunity to stop and listen to it or to get closer and look at it. But we don't get both. That's very interesting. That's the same one we heard before, I think. Oh no, it's a different one. Okay, look at him. They're pretty. Got a little green stripe. I do like that we have that trade-off of you can listen to them sing or you can get closer and look at them. That feels pretty neat. Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of random wandering. Hello! Get 8 hours of sleep. Oh, it is 7 p.m. Okay, we're gonna sleep in this little cabin. I think if you wanted, because at the moment we're wandering around looking for opportunities, right? So you want any other stuff you add into the game to be tied into that. We're wandering around looking for opportunities to spot a bird. I'm thinking about the coins. It's like, okay, how do we earn coins? How do we get more coins? They could be as simple as finding them. But also, if we had like a tier system where we're like going and collecting rubbish, like trash that people have left behind and trading it in for coins, that would align quite well with what we're... That would align quite well with what we're doing moment to moment, which is like wandering around looking for opportunities, right? Because then you've got opportunities to pick stuff up for money, which is kind of like a helping the environment theme, which fits with the birding theme, even though it's not birding, but it sort of fits with the activity of like wandering around waiting for stuff to move. Yeah, the rhythm game for listening to the bird song definitely needs a little bit more polishing and tweaking, but it's a good way of using that mechanic, I think. This building opens at 9. Well, look, I'm just a guy that likes to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and walk around. Okay? Hello, birdie. Yeah, I do think we want a bit more variation in like how long they take to turn around. I don't think it needs to be globally easier. I think the one in the tutorial did need to be easier. And it would be good if birds had different character in terms of like how quickly they turned around, or like the threshold before they fly off, so that they just all feel a little bit different to interact with and you do get some easy wins. That is a chiff. Yes. I am the chiff identifier. I love to be awake at 6:30. The first thing I do in the morning is get up, look for my favorite chiff, point at it and say, that's a chiff, and then throw myself in the river. What's on here? Learn of 10 new birds. I will learn of 10 new birds. Ah. I do think this is a wonderful game theme. And I think this is a good example of like, if you want to make a game like this, if you want to make a life sim type thing where you're wandering around talking to characters in a community, if you want to make that kind of cozy game, people are going to expect it to have farming. People are going to expect it to have some deep system of building a farm and building up a house and all of that kind of stuff. The only way you can make one of these games without that in is to do something like the dev is doing here and give it a theme that helps constrain it so much that it makes sense why we don't have a house and a farm and everything. Because the common complaint with those types of games is just that they just don't have enough stuff in. But if you've made it around a particular activity, then it really kind of justifies not having all of that extra stuff. Not you again. I'm sick of common crested chiffs now. I can identify them with my eyes closed. I would love to see a ladderback woodlancer. Oh, hello. Who's that? Who is she? I don't know her. I couldn't even tell which way was the wrong way. That's definitely a chiff. Ah. Well, well, well. If it isn't a wobbly tree. I'm going to listen to this beautiful song. Or some sort of warbler if I ever saw one. Not raspid. Mango burb. Who's this? Is that going to be another mango burb? Oh, there's one. There's one. Oh, hello. I think you might be that little... That's a raspid, maybe. I see a yellow beak. I'm clicking identify. Oh no, we've seen two crow-like things. We've seen the green... Oh! It's not a raspid. A raspid is the one that looks like a crow with a yellow beak. Okay, I don't have the names for these a lot. So we basically got a game economy where we have to talk to humans to find out what the birds are or read them off of signs. Otherwise we don't have them in our little book to identify them. It's a neat little set of systems. It makes sense. It's kind of intuitive, simple and easy to understand. Welcome. How may I help you today? I just wanted to meet my neighbors. Nice to meet you. I'm Luther von Aert. Is there anything else I can do for you today? Do you know any local birds? I'm here to meet birds. My favourite is the common moon caller. It's nocturnal. I think the park south of town has signs. Oh, hello, moon caller. Hello, moon caller. Do you know any birds? Hey, hon, what can I get you? Just wanted to meet my new neighbours. That's sweet, Bobothy. I'm Wanda. Can I get you anything? Do you know any local birds? It's all I care about. I'm the bird guy. I just love Monet's Arietta. Their song is so pretty. Monet? The nature centre in the forest has more information on birds. Ah, I've seen one of them. Hey, hun slash sweetie slash shug slash bobothy. What can I get you? Hey, hun slash sweetie slash shug slash bobothy. How do I want to ask what's on the menu. What's on the menu? Is birds on the menu? One coffee. Thank you. I don't know this guy. I've never seen this guy before. Oh, no, hang on. No, I don't know what that is. I mean, it's not a raspid. Oh, it is a common raspid. For some reason, I thought it had a yellow beak, but I've misrepresented it. Misremembered it, sorry. You're a raspid as well, aren't you? You cheeky little raspid. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the book again. If I see that very dramatic looking one, that's Arietta. I haven't found the one that looks like a mango-shaped bird yet, so... And I need to drink some coffee and get some energy back. Let's go to the library and read all the books about birds. Welcome to the Fox Creek Library. Would you like a library card? Yes. Awesome, here's your new card. Now I can help you with books and research. Is there anything else I can do for you today? Do you have any books on birds? Yes, but most are checked out. I do have one about the evergreen turkey. Turvey, sorry. I thought it was the turkey. Ah, that's the... I know that one. You know what's great? There's something really cute here about when I saw the silhouette of that bird, I could not... Well, I thought that was the head and that was the tail. And then we see it represented this way and it's just angled in a totally different shape. That's a really cute conceit of how that silhouette interface works. There is a bird flying above. I'm going to move closer. I'm going to fly up into the sky and see it. Hello. Hello. Hello, I don't have a picture of you in my book. Can you tell me what you are? I'm a bird. Oh, okay. Nothing on the top but a bucket and a mop and an illustrated book about birds. I'm forbidden from singing more than one line. Nothing on the top but a bucket and a mop and a... That's, you are the Turvey. Yeah. They don't call me the identifier of evergreen Turveys for nothing. Right down here. You are a chiff. Yeah. You are a raspid. No, you are a turvey. Yay. Don't even have to look at them properly anymore. So good at burbs. I'm going to move closer to this guy. I'm going to try and pay a bit more attention to the birdsong identifying minigame next, because I don't know who that is. He's got a great little red eyebrow, though. Okay, so let's start paying a bit more attention to the bird. Okay, so I know who this is, right? I know it's an Arietta or whatever. Let's listen to the bird. So I think that little introductory jingle to the minigame is confusing. Okay, so we've got the bird song. Okay, so they've basically given us two ways of identifying the bird. We can guess from the silhouette, we can sneak up on it. Or we can use the bird song, which is good. It's like multiple routes to victory. So even if you have one of those things you prefer doing, you can like rotate between them so you don't get bored. The thing I don't like about the bird song minigame at the moment is you do that little trill at the beginning that's like a fanfare that introduces the minigame. It goes doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And the problem is that kind of gets in my way of really like understanding which bit is the tune. So I would have a different sting that isn't birdsong to introduce that, and then we can focus on the actual song that the bird is making, because otherwise the trill, the little fanfare, sounds much more musical than the actual bit where we're supposed to be listening to the bird song. You're a chiff. I don't know why I'm... You're a chiff. I mean, I didn't identify that from your song. I could just see your... I know what a chiff looks like now. Oh. Bobathy? Oh, I think I fell asleep. Ran out of energy. So yeah, we're going to need a few tells before that runs out. You know, I ran out of energy. I passed out. This is like a classic mechanic in Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon and games of that ilk. But you do need to like warn it a little bit, you know, make sure that there's some kind of flashing going on up here. Maybe do some sort of vignetting to show that your character is tired or something, because I just didn't see that coming anywhere. This is great. I'm going to move on to the next game. I think there's a lot of potential here. Like I said, I don't think you need a separate tutorial. I think the game is reasonably self-explanatory. And the thing is, a lot of the time, the stuff you can put in to remind a seasoned player how to play the game is enough to explain most of the game to a new player anyway. Like if I go here and I go move closer with D, but don't let it... Yeah, I mean, ideally this would show like a letter key so that it doesn't just look like a random letter. But this is all we need to play this minigame, right? And maybe a little bit of leeway so the first couple of times the player does it, the shake is a little bit longer or whatever. But we don't need a dialogue-driven tutorial to teach this minigame. It's pretty self-explanatory. I know who you are anyway. You're the Woodlancer. No! Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty great. I really like this. I think it's such a good example of how you can scope down a type of game by making the theme more focused on something, because every time I see that someone is working on one of these top-down cozy games that looks like a Stardew Valley or something, I just think, well, people are going to come to your game expecting to build things, expecting to grow things. How are you going to meet that expectation? Well, in this case, you can divert the expectation, because you can have all the cuteness of like wandering around meeting characters in a community, but because we've given the character a particular job that isn't about changing the environment, it's just about finding things in it, it kind of makes sense why this would be a smaller game. So like bear that stuff in mind. I mean, it's not just cozy games, but I think any game where people are used to building things and stuff, you have to be conscious of how that introduces more scope. The other example of this I often think about is if you've played Pacific Drive. I mean, Pacific Drive is mechanically, in terms of mechanics and systems, this is a Subnautica type game, right? This is a survival crafting game. But the fact that it's a car limits the expected scope of the game. Because often as developers, we think of the scope as like, how much am I willing to do before I finish this game? I want to finish this game in 6 months. Okay, that determines the scope. But the players have an expected scope based on the genre of game as well, right? And a survival crafting game, you expect to be chopping down trees, you expect to be building a base. But the thing that Pacific Drive does that is very clever is because it's a game about like having a cool car and looking after it and like building your workshop for your car, that automatically changes the player's expectation based on the theme that, okay, we might actually need to go and get a tool and like take some bits off this car to put it in our car or siphon some petrol or something. But suddenly the kind of genre expectation of, oh, we're playing a survival crafting game, so I need to chop down 30 of these trees is gone, right? The survival crafting expectation that I need to build a log cabin is gone because of the theme. And it's the same with that previous game. You can kind of like limit the expectations of the player by changing the fantasy, and then that allows you to make a much more kind of constrained, smaller version of a game whose genre would normally be much bigger. Another one I thought was a good example of this, which I think has kind of done all right on... I mean, it's got enough like articles and stuff about it. There's this game, kind of cozy game called The Rains Down Players. That I think it's on Steam. Let's see how it did. I think this got a Switch release as well. So Rains Down Players is like a little, you kind of wander around the town, you talk to people, you're in a little community, there's loads of little characters to meet and stuff. But rather than being a farmer, you run a theatre and you put on shows every night, and you collect the inspiration for your shows by like going around and talking to people and finding items and stuff. And this was another example of that, of like, okay, people that play like little cozy community sim games, if you give them a game that looks like this and it doesn't have a clear theme, they're just going to think it's a farming sim and they're going to expect to be like building and farming and stuff. Whereas this one, Oh look, it's free at the moment. You can just play it. Again, because it's got that theme of you are doing a particular job, it constrains the game down, and then people don't make these unreasonable assumptions that because the game is in genre X, it must have all of these other systems in. So I always think when you're thinking about your player fantasy, like the birding thing is a really good example of how you can take a game that looks like it would be a farming sim and then do something much more constrained with it, because the fantasy and what the player's kind of role is in the world is much more limited. Okay, next one, Guild Breaker. We're testing some combat, a tactical RPG that combines classic grid-based combat with dirty fighting combos and guild management. Okay, but we're just doing the actual combat itself at this stage, I think. Let me just get that ready. This is a kind of Thieves Guild type thing. There's the app. Danger ranges, pause, next unit. Okay. Okay, I can play this with the mouse or the keyboard. Turn 1 objective. Defeat the commander, destroy all supplies, rework the plan. Okay. Ah, are these my characters? Yeah, these are attack lines. This is what's going to happen. So, Bridget, you go over there. Can you attack? Can you only attack diagonally? I mean, you've got a bow. It looks like you should be able to. Okay, we're effectively doing an Advance Wars type game then, right? These aren't units, but we're doing like, okay, you move on the map and then you attack someone and then the UX is pretty decent there. It kind of works the way I would expect it to work. You know, you can click on attack and then click on the enemy, or you can just click on the enemy and if you're in the right position, they attack. It's good. Right, you're going to attack. What's a combo? I don't understand what the combo means. Edward's just yeeting stuff at people. Mini Fire Emblem, yeah. I do think, you know, kind of thinking of suggested scope. I was working with someone who was making a game similar to this. It was less Fire Emblem and more Final Fantasy Tactics, but I did tell them as soon as people see the aesthetic and they see like pixel art characters in a loosely anime style, they are going to expect it to be a narrative game, and they're going to expect these to be characters that they can learn about as like speaking characters that are involved in some sort of drama. And that means that I think if you want to scale that down and you want to make a game that is just about the tactical combat, I mean, that's part of the reason why Into the Breach is mechs, I feel, is that if you do tactical combat on a grid with little characters and they look like people, we're suddenly in Fire Emblem Suikoden type you know, Fire Emblem Suikoden type territory where people expect to get to know these characters, right? Because the aesthetic is kind of telling you something about what sort of game it is and what it's inspired by. And yeah, it's like you can make mini Fire Emblem, but the expectation that people who like those games are going to bring to that is that your game is going to have dialogue and quests and all these other things. So yeah, Hot Worlds, that's a very good point. So we're kind of in the territory here. Like I spoke about this at the start of the stream. This is someone's kind of personal sort of feasibility test of like, can I build the thing I want to build? rather than like a prototype where anyone needs to weigh in and tell you whether or not you've made something that works. Because we know this works. This is all stuff that we've seen in other games, you know. Yeah, that music is it's a little bit much, isn't it, to like go to like this whole other piece of music for a couple of seconds on the battle like that. I do feel like a lot of the things being tested here are kind of known quantities, you know? It's very funny that we've got a healer called McCoy. It's like a Star Trek doctor, isn't he? Backstab you with my hook. Yeah, I mean the kind of cheap way to do adaptive music for an indie game like this is you have two audio tracks that are always running and are exactly the same length and looping together, and then you fade between them at various points. But yeah, I mean, the real problem here is that we're just kind of testing a bunch of game mechanics that we know work from other games. So it's like, what are we testing? What do you want your playtesters to give you information about here at this stage? It's like, okay. Yeah, it's like, it works. I'm not finding any of it too confusing. You know, it's reasonably easy to understand. Yeah, we've spent a lot of time on like animating characters and stuff, but we're also setting bars for ourselves, both in terms of like having to do all those animations, but also having named characters and stuff just sets the game up to be a story game. Level 2 chemist. Edward's got a promotion. That little dash that he does, I think I have the same animation skeleton pack that you're using for those. It looks very similar to one that I've been using for my run cycles. Okay. Right, medic man, you go over there and wait. You go up there and shoot that guy. Treasure chest on the battlefield that I don't seem to be able to do anything with. I don't know why I keep sending my medic to punch people. He's not very good. Drink a flask. Don't get killed, medic, please. I'll do the switcheroo. I like the switcheroo move. Can you fight from there? Can you shoot them? Okay. So yeah, I mean, again, come back to that question at the start of like, what is being tested here? What are we testing? Well, the UX is okay. You know, generally speaking, everything in the game worked the way that I expected it to work. So there was nothing in the game that was that confusing. There were some things that could have been better, like, you know, understanding the states of when we're moving versus when we're attacking and stuff like that. But generally speaking, everything worked the way you would expect it to work. And you can do cycles on that stuff of like coming back to it and improving it and everything. But what are we actually testing? I don't know. Again, it feels more like a technical learning project of like how much of these kind of mechanics from these other games can I build, which is fine. But like, what are you supposed to get from seeing someone else? You know, what are you supposed to get from seeing someone else play it? The kind of alarm bells that ring for me when I see an indie tactics game that is rendered in this particular way where, you know, the art wasn't quite anime pixel art, but it felt like that's what you were going for. The characters have names. You know, we are in that kind of Fire Emblem Suikoden type territory, which is going to mean that if you make the best version possible of this game, players are going to come to it with the expectation that it's going to be a heavily narrative experience. And that's going to cause you lots of problems, both in terms of like having to do writing when you may not be a writer, right? And also damaging your ability to make it into other types of games which might actually have a bigger audience, right? So let's go indie games like Final Fantasy Tactics. Let's do a quick competition review. What have we got that's similar? I mean, the thing that I find most unappealing about that art style is like the big, tall, 2-pixel high eyes at the moment. It feels a little bit like an art style that is aimed at children rather than adults. And so I don't have the... It was a downloaded one, wasn't it? Yeah. Let's just get the art back up on screen. So I can't... Everything here is kind of okay. This just looks like, you know, someone's having a go, kind of hobby game, indie game, pixel art. And it's relatively simple. So at this kind of level of fidelity, I don't really feel much of a problem with it. When we do the attack animations, and I say this with an understanding that the dev has probably spent a lot of time on these, but there's something about the style of these faces that just feels a little bit... I don't know, it feels a little bit like a kind of cartoon aimed at children rather than an adult game, and I'm not really kind of able to express that in any more kind of helpful way. So, I mean, if we go and look at similar games that are out at the moment, Death Howl. So Death Howl has kind of card-driven... I mean, let's do this in order, actually. So, Into the Breach, right? Already mentioned it once this stream, but it's worth thinking about for lots of reasons. So Into the Breach, this is like a kind of almost chess-like game where there's hardly any random rolls and everything. But this is like, how do we do an indie game where the combat is kind of similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, but where it works as an indie game? And when I say works as an indie game, what do I mean? It's like, well, okay, how can we create a game where it is mainly just about doing that core combat system over and over again with lots of variation, and we don't create a rod for our own backs by needing to have loads of professional level writing and lots of story content that can only be consumed once and stuff like that. So what Into the Breach does is it's like a roguelike campaign of doing these little combats. They don't last very long, and crucially, because the theming is mech pilots piloting mechs, obviously you could take that in a kind of mech anime direction and have the characters have like deep relationships and stuff, but it's kind of not as expected because of the type of game it is and the fact that Like, we're not seeing all these little named Fire Emblem characters, because as soon as you see that, it starts to create the expectation that they are going to be story characters. I think you can get away with a middle ground by just having characters that say, like, they have a like bark that they say at the beginning of combat, like in like the Street Fighter taunts or something like that. But I think as soon as you're trying to make the appeal of your game into like tactical combat with named fantasy hero characters, and there's like a little ensemble of them, you're starting to push yourself in the direction of people are going to expect this to be a game about like narrative and character relationships, which you just can't afford to do, on top of also being a solo developed tactics game. Death Howl, this is a game that was made by definitely not a solo dev, at least a small team. This is like doing grid-based combat with cards driving it, and then you're like one character moving around on the grid, but you're like casting spells to push things around and damage them in different ways and everything. Much kind of very stylish looking game, but incredibly simple art style. It's this kind of like dark Scandinavian take on like a minimalist pixel art thing. But you know, this is, if you're asking what the quote unquote competition is, all of this is the competition, you know. Like interesting looking, very focused on the tactics. There is a story in Death Howl, there is a bit of a story in Into the Breach, but the kind of making it look like a kind of anime, character-driven anime game is always going to create that expectation that the game is going to have stuff in that you might not be able to deliver or might not want to deliver. You know, I'm a Suikoden boy. I love collecting lots of little guys to put in my castle and taking them out to do battles and stuff. But that's a game for 100 people to make together. That's not a game for one person to make, you know. So yeah, I mean, lots of good work there in terms of getting that game to work, but hard to tell what's really being tested here. Because I mean, we've got a set of characters, they've got different abilities. This guy can throw an acid flask. I would also, I think, if you want to look at indie, I mean, with the game that's there, like in that kind of state and with that kind of set of inspirations, what I would be doing at this stage is just saying, like, here are similar games in the indie space. Go and look at them and see what they do structurally to work as an indie game. Because with Guildbreaker, even if you make the best possible version of it and you make really good art and you get better at all the stuff, it's only going to work as a game for the sorts of people who are going to like be willing to buy like a small like $5 indie game if it kind of works in that space. And you can't make a 300-hour-long story campaign. So you should be looking at things like Into the Breach. You should be looking at things like Death Howl. I would also look at Invisible Ink, right? I think Invisible Ink is a very good reference game for what you're doing, especially if you're trying to theme your game around a if you're trying to theme your game around like a thieves guild, right? If someone were to make Invisible Ink, but it was themed around a fantasy world thieves guild, breaking into places and like fighting the guards and finding the loot, that would be a great game. I don't know if anyone's made that. Rain Curtsy, I don't know, Rain. I mean, whenever anyone says they're interested in story and indie games, I'm forever like suggesting people check out things like Florence, which is like a story game that has no words in it. I think Reigns is a good game to look at. It's not a visual novel. It's a game about making choices through dialogue with characters that have a very small like strategic mini game. 80 Days is kind of a visual novel, but it has a little bit of a strategic element. But I don't know. I think I think when it like it's good to know what type of games you want to make, right? You're always going to have an easier time making a small indie game if you know what type of game you want to make and you're not like, hey, I can make anything. Um But I think, if you're asking me like what would be your recommendations for indie story games, if that's what you intend to make, you should already know more indie story games than I do. Like, cause I can't pull out that many examples because it's not really what I play games for. If I want to experience a story, I will watch a TV program. But also, I tend to gravitate towards the types of games I want to learn about because they're the types of games I want to make. And although there are some story games that I absolutely love and think are brilliant examples of what they do, like 80 Days or Disco Elysium or whatever, I don't play loads of them because they start to give me ideas for types of games that I don't think I would be well suited to execute. Um, yeah, walking sim. I mean, also learn what walking simulators are because I think that is a term that gets really misapplied a lot of the time now. So you could call there are games like Proteus, right, which you just walk around in an area that's a nice vibe, and technically speaking, this is a walking simulator. But the early walking simulators, like things like Dear Esther and Gone Home, are you know walking simulator was a derogatory term given by bros that didn't like the idea of a game where you just walked around and looked at stuff. But the whole point of a game like Gone Home is it's creating an incomplete story about something and then taking all of the things that you would need to see or read or whatever to fully understand the situation that you're in and spreading them out around a 3D environment, right? And if you can think of I mean, Gone Home is reproducible. You can totally remake Gone Home with a totally different family, a different thing under it all, right? Like all of those kind of bourgeois novels about family troubles, that have long names like Where the Crawdads Sing or whatever. All of those types of like books that are about a family having problems, you could turn those into a game like Gone Home. You put the player in a house full of a family's memories and let them wander around and sift through things that gradually give them an impression of the people who lived there. And obviously, like, this is a genre of game that is born out of a constraint where someone is saying, I want to tell a story about humans, but I don't want to animate humans standing there talking to you. That is not something that I'm like up to scratch on doing. I don't have the resources to do. So how do we tell a story about real people in a kind of socially realistic setting without animating people? Well, we create an environment that tells the story of the people who were previously in that environment. Gone Home is a totally replicable game. You can do the same thing, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen more games that do the same thing. Um, you know, Gone Home is about a family dealing with a very specific type of issue, which is why it resonated with more people. But there is no reason why you can't take any of those kind of bits of literary fiction about families in turmoil and turn them into a similar game. Make a big spooky mansion, make a Resident Evil mansion, fill it with all of the stuff that happened in Saltburn, right? That's a game right there. Like the perverted backstory of a wealthy family for some reason you're in their mansion on their own and you get to find out about Barry Keoghan humping a grave or whatever. Any of those family drama stories could be turned into a game. We call them walking simulators, but I would call these exploratory story games, right? You're learning a story through the medium of level design rather than the medium of dialogue writing. Yeah, first person environmental story game, Alan, I think that sounds about right. We have this problem in video games of, I think it's a form of gatekeeping where we deliberately we give genres bad names. And sometimes I don't, Hot Wheels, I mean, I would say walking sim isn't derogatory anymore, but it is such a stupid term for what that game actually is that if you go on Steam and you look at the things that people have made and labeled as a walking sim, it's very clear that they don't understand that walking sims are, first person exploration based story games, because people just make a game where you walk around and then they tag it as walking sim. And that shows that we've got this historical issue with how we name genres, right? The thing I've noticed is when hardcore gamers like a type of game, they name it after other games, right? So roguelike or Metroidvania. What that does is it creates a canon of games where it's like, well, you should know what Metroid is, you should know what Rogue is, you should know what Castlevania is. So the game genres that we respect, because they are like subgenres of hardcore action games, they get to be named after other games, and that creates this kind of gatekeeping where it's like, well, you should know what these other games are. And then the genres that hardcore gamers don't like, for whatever reason, get these derogatory names, like Walking Simulator or Friend Slot. It's like, oh, you got friends, you play low quality games as a social thing with your friends. Ugh. And it's just interesting. Like, we very rarely get a new genre come out where it's got like a proper name that just describes exactly what it does. And if you compare this, if you go on Board Game Geek, right? Go on Board Game Geek, the most beautiful website. I mean, to be fair, I used to mock this quite a lot, but they've made the UX and the website much better. If we go to categories of games on Board Game Geek, and one of the things that I noticed being a video gamer and a board gamer is that board gamers do not do this. They do not make up inscrutable genre names. The only time this really happens in board games is these very big meta categories like Euro games and Ameritrash, which are like much more vibe based. But I think the reason is when you're actually trying to organize board games with other people, even the act of choosing which board game to play requires people to be able to communicate properly about it. So that's why, I'm always going on about engine building. And then a lot of people are like, what's engine building in a video game? That's not a genre. It's like, well, it's a concept. It's a game design concept that I've taken from board games, and I'm applying it here because it helps us to understand what you're actually enjoying in the game. Whereas the blanket term roguelike doesn't help you to understand why some people like Balatro and some people like Vampire Survivors, but they don't like this or they don't like this, And I think we have this like ongoing problem in games where we do this weird exclusionary thing of giving things deliberately stupid names as an in-joke so that other people can't easily access what we're doing. I mean, Walking Sim as derogatory mainly came out of the fact that Gone Home was a non-violent game about telling a story about queer people that people that wanted to play shooting games were like, that shouldn't exist. And what Sestopus said, there's a difference between a game about exploring environments and an interactive media about being in the environment without any game element. I think the way I interpret that is like, what are you doing in your head as you play, right? And in something like Gone Home, I think you have to sort of have this understanding of there is part of the game that is in the player's head that is like a form of interactivity where, okay, picking up a letter and looking at it and putting it down and then opening a drawer and looking at it, those interactive moments aren't very interesting if you isolate them. But when you sort of think of them as obtaining information so that you can put the information together in your head and form a bigger picture about the thing, which not everyone is going to actually understand is happening when someone plays this game unless they're actively involved in it, right? If you decide that you don't care about that puzzle, then you don't have access to the game mechanic because it just seems to just be the interface of picking things up and looking at them, right? Once you decide that matters and you want to understand what all of these things are together, then you've got this kind of meta game going on that's not, I mean, it is strongly encouraged by the video game, but if you refuse to engage with it, then you can't see the part of the game that is a game. It's the same with something like Her Story, where you're, the game doesn't really tell you whether you're doing it right or not. But if you kind of if you interact with it in the basis that it wants to be interacted with, then there's a lot more interactivity than you would think. It's kind of like, you can read a detective novel and not try and solve the crime as you go along. If you do that, you're not having the experience that the writer intended, and you're not having the experience that is kind of what most people go to those books for and actually when there's an interesting historical thing with that, when Arthur Conan Doyle and all of those guys were like writing those kind of Victorian detective novels, there was actually like a writers group that had an agreement that basically, how do we decide what a good one of these is, right? Someone was talking about the Berlin interpretation. This is like the, I don't know, the London interpretation of a good detective novel. And one of the original kind of rules of that genre, not created by the fans, but by the writers, was when you get to the end and you discover who done it, all of the kind of clues that were used to prove who done it at the end should have been stuff that was like available to the reader at the same time. And this is why certain films with a twist feel really bad. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen M. Night Shyamalan's The Village or something like that. It feels really bad when you get the twist because the cinematography was so manipulative that when you get to the twist, there's no way, unless you're going like very consciously, this is a film with a twist, what's the twist going to be? There was no way that the story was told gave you access to the information that you needed to work out what was really going on, right? So I think you have to think about genres in terms of like, there is a way of thinking that this thing wants you to do. And if people come to it and they don't want to do that way of thinking because they're not the intended audience, then who cares, right? Like if you go to Gone Home and you just see it as a thing for like walking around looking at objects and not thinking about a family's history or something, you're not going to get the intended experience. And that's fine. We need to just be like aware that, um, yeah. Yeah, I can see the YouTube chat, Alan. It's showing up for me. It's a little bit too fast for me at the moment. So with Guildbreaker, I think there's a couple of challenges. It's like, do you actually want to make a game where you write dialogue? Like I recently cut a lot of the story out of the game I was making and rethemed it because I realized that this is making the success of the project hinge on another skill. And like I've done writing for games, right? But I've only written in a particular mode. I've written like very silly comedy writing and I feel reasonably confident to do that. But if I have to do like serious fantasy writing and make people care about the world and the characters, I start to think, does anyone really want to read my first attempt at that in a game where they're there to do a different thing? So it's like every time you throw another thing into a game, you're creating like a skill hurdle for yourself to get over. And if that thing is potentially optional and you could take it out, then it's like, okay, well, you know, maybe I should make things easier for myself by making a tactical combat game, but making it very, very clear that this isn't going to be Fire Emblem. It's not going to be Suikoden. It's not going to be Final Fantasy Tactics. And I think you can do that through theme. Like I said, with the birding game, with Pacific Drive, all of these games, sometimes a theme can suggest a particular reduction in scope that makes it easier for people to accept your game as a smaller version, right? I can't remember the name of it. There's a game going around on Blue Sky that's like a tactics game where, oh, it's called Tomb Guard, where you are the, this is a real-time pause and play game. So this works like the old Baldur's Gate games, but you are the little skeletons guarding the tomb, right? You're the skeletons guarding the tomb. What does that do for the expectations of the game? Well, I'm not expecting these to be characters with backstories who talk a lot because we're much more focused on the fact that they're just like cool little guys with a particular set of abilities. You know, quite excited to play this one actually. Um, so think about the theme because as soon as we start to do like all of these named characters, it starts to suggest that we're going to have more kind of deep story stuff than you might have the time or resources to do. Okay, this is one of the ones that was sent in ages ago on Indies Under the Knife. I thought I would just give it a quick play because it was one of those ones that's just been hanging around in the prototype pile. Okay. We're going to just we just got a big button that says quit game on the first screen. How do I get out of that? One sec. Close some stuff down. I think Lantaka might be breaking everything. Okay, we'll leave that one for now. Let me just see if I can get us out of this. What's different between roguelike and RPG? A roguelike is a run-based game, right? So you use procedural generation and other types of things to make a game that is relatively short and can be played multiple times. An RPG is a game of linear progression. Okay, we're going to skip the game we were going to. We're going to go straight to mech run because that last one is not running properly. And then Revenant Realms after that, and I will do a download on that because it needs to be, it doesn't have an in-browser version. This is a prototype for a roguelike tactics game with mechs. You're being chased by a fleet and must escape, fight your way through all the enemies in front of you and capture them to turn them into allies who you command. Okay, so we're going to get another tactics game. So there'll be some interesting points of comparison here. I mean, I think the thing with Guildbreaker is even just like the way the characters are presented. If they're presented as characters in a story, it's going to create that expectation. If they have like masks and stuff on, and they look more like they're just there to be kind of cool combat pawns, it changes the expectation, I think. Okay, choose a battle. Tank squared, 5 heat signatures detected. Welcome to mech run. Okay, that's a window over this, is it? This is the battle selection screen. You win the game after passing 5 battles. You can access your hangar at any time by pressing the H or E key or by pressing the hangar button. Okay, here's the hangar. I got a ship. I think one of the things I'm feeling is that people get far too far with something that they're calling a prototype before they test it. So I almost feel like a prototype for a roguelike tactics game, you should almost be forgetting this bit because the roguelike bit doesn't matter because that's a meta game structure. And you just want to prototype the tactics game and make sure that, you know, like we saw with the grey hex-based game earlier, just give people an encounter, let them play it, let them feedback on it, give them another encounter, let them play it, let them feedback on it. Because if your prototype has the tactics combat and the roguelike elements, you're probably just testing too much at once because there's going to be stuff in the tactics game that just sucks because you haven't tested it yet. So why should people care about testing that for you and also care about the loop of like upgrading things or progressing through the game and stuff at the same time, you know? This is one of the reasons why when I did the first alphas with Golem Gourmet, which is now Dirt World, or the other way around, Dirt World, which is now Golem Gourmet, all you could do between runs was like upgrade your health bar or upgrade how many keys you started with. It was like, okay, this is going to be a roguelite, so you will do a run, get some resources, invest them, do another run, get some, but we're not actually building out the rest of the roguelite. We're just giving people the like core experience of the game and then hinting at something else. And it can be very common for people to show you something and say, this is a prototype of my game. And it's like, you've made every part of the game. Why didn't you just prototype like the one bit that you needed to test? Okay, the goal is to get your ship to any white tile. So we're trying to get our ship to the other side of this map. Right click a unit for a quick preview of their stats and weapons. Left click a friendly unit to select it. Okay, that was too much information without letting me do the thing. You've expected me to like remember 3 paragraphs worth of information rather than letting me do it. Okay, I moved my ship over there. When your units have moved or attacked, they are done for the turn. Your ship can unload units before or after it moves. You can end your turn by pressing the F key. So I can unload. Do I have units? Unload. There we go. Unload. That there. So we've got a big ship and then it's got mechs in it and we're unloading them. And then we finish the turn with F, and then all of these other things move. That's even just like looking at this and knowing these genres. I don't want to play a combat game where we're doing turn-based and I'm moving one character and I've got to kill 6 things. Like that's, to me, that's just a lot of clicking for and not much thinking, probably. Okay, what can I do with this guy? Can I attack? Beam sword, do I click up there? Where are the abilities? I've got beam sword and beam rifle up there. I don't seem to have any way to trigger them. How do I make them do stuff? This is the combat screen. Your unit and its actions are on the left while the enemy's actions are on the right. Every time a unit is attacked, it becomes easier to hit. If a unit's hit chance is 100%, any excess hit chance is converted into crit chance. Okay. Sure. Start battle. So I don't seem to be able to trigger combat myself. I don't want to control one guy and fight 6 enemies. What do you suggest instead? More player units or less? Well, I mean, there's a reason why tactical combat games aren't usually about controlling one character. We can get into that in a minute, but it's about spatially arranging your characters so that they are in the best formation for what you're trying to do, right? And if I'm only moving one character around, then it needs to be about something else because it's no longer about arranging a set of characters to best exploit a situation, right? So turn-based single character games are things like Hitman Go or John Wick Hex. Mentioned both of these earlier. You can make a turn-based single character tactics game, but it needs to be very much about setting up situations in the environment. This is just a massive open grid, which would be fine for a war game with lots of units, but what, I'm just supposed to move one guy around the map. Yeah, Animus in the chat said, what sort of decision does this ask? Yeah, exactly. I mean, what could I let's look at the map and imagine the game that could be here, right? Because at the moment I don't know how to trigger combat on my own, and even if I did, why would I choose one of those guys to fight before any of the others, right? So let's look at this and imagine what it could be. Okay, so maybe fighting in the forest has a different effect compared to fighting on the land, right? That could be a decision point. Maybe trying to fight enemies when I've only got one next to me instead of 2 next to me is advantageous in some way. Maybe bringing my ship in is advantageous in some way. I don't really have any of the information required to know which of these things would be true, right? What I would say for this game, what we can learn from this game, because the dev's probably not watching this right now and may never, because I don't send out emails to everyone letting them know that I'm streaming their games, because it's too time consuming and would be counterproductive to encourage people to only watch the channel when their specific game is on. I think what you can think about in general from this game is that the tutorial thing that came up earlier, we've had a couple of tutorial boxes that came up, right? And this is similar to what I said about the birding game. Is your game actually at a stage where it needs a tutorial? Because what this really needs at this stage, for someone to be playing this blind without the developer there helping them, right? Which is how all your playtesting should start. Your earliest playtest should be you are watching someone play the game and you are there to teach it. Or you just watch them play and you see how much they can work out, and then you explain things when you need to get them unstuck. Do that in person. Do it in find a cafe where they'll let you plug your laptop in. Tell people on your local Facebook or Instagram or whatever that you're playtesting a game. Let them, when people playtest your games, they're doing work for you. They're doing you a favor. But it's also something that not many people get a chance to do. And you'd be surprised how many random people there will be around in any community that would like to be involved in that. But the optimum way of doing your early playtest is with a real person, watching them, like guiding them, seeing what they struggle with, and just kind of like taking it all in. In a situation like this, where you want someone to be able to play the game without you being there, right? I don't think the solution is to start doing loads of pop-ups with tutorial on. That's for launch candidate games that are ready to go live. What you should be doing is on every screen of the game, making sure that I understand what my options are, right? So we have a thing in the corner that says left click to select, right click to move or something, and we just keep it there. And then eventually when your game needs a full tutorial, maybe you start to take that stuff away. But there's lots of stuff here that doesn't really tell me, like, okay, forest, move cost 2, evade plus 10%, defense plus 10%. Okay, so I have a slight benefit to being in a forest in terms of evasion rates and defense rates, but it's 10%, it's tiny. So, and when we're both in the forest, it applies to both of us. So how do I know when I've got an advantage, right? So Unknown said, I've heard advice to handle saving early. That tool might be putting the cart before the horse. So something that I can not emphasize enough is that a lot of the advice that you will get about programming for games is about industrial best practices. So you might get some advice like build your save system early, or you might get advice like, create tools to make it easier to make content later on. Those are good pieces of advice if you fully know what you're doing and you're making a game. Like if you're in a studio context where you are programming a game and other people are working out what it is, absolutely do that. When you are making a small indie game, you're still working out what the game is as you go. So doing those things prematurely is usually a waste of your time, because you're usually still learning all of the skills that you need to use to make a game, right? So all of the time you spend doing anything that's not player facing before you've actually worked out if the game is any good is potentially wasted. So be very, very wary of that kind of stuff. I'm not going to spend much longer on this game because I can't even work out how to trigger combat. But this just has a fundamental problem that a tactics game is about positioning lots of characters, and I've got one mech and I'm fighting 6 guys, and it's just going to be the same amount of like just rolling random dice at each other for each one. There's not any variation between these where I can look at them and go, oh, I should fight him with him and I should fight him with him. It's just like, what do you think is happening when someone plays a tactics game? I don't know. Lots of people are feasibility testing. Yeah, they're building the basics of a genre of game that they know how it works. But I think the problem here is, like when we played Guildbreaker, right? You could see in that game that the dev understands what someone is doing when they play a tactical combat game. They are looking at the units on the battlefield and making choices about who's best to fight who. A 1v many tactical combat game, like, how is the best thing to do ever not just attack the enemy with the least health? You know? It's just... there needs to be meaningful decisions. I think sometimes people are like driven by the desire to kind of simulate a particular fictional world. They're like, oh, I like mechs, I like anime, so that's all the stuff an anime mech game would have. And it's like, where's the decision making? Where's the thing that makes this interesting? Yeah, kind of said there's some advice I don't agree with, like not making artwork for a game. You should grey box, but if you don't know how long it will take to make an asset, you might be barking up the wrong tree. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the advice for like the practical, sensible order of doing things in a game is perfectly accurate if you already know how to do everything. right? So if you know how to build, if you know how to program all the parts of your game and you have perfect art skills and you can execute anything you want to, then by all means do things in the practical order. Do a great box, work out the art style afterwards, blah, blah, blah. But most people don't have all those skills. So you have to do everything a little bit at a time. Otherwise, you'll build a prototype for a game that requires certain types of art, and then you'll get to the end of that and you go, oh, I can't actually make this game because I need to learn that other skill and I don't want to, kind of thing. The problem with this one is just that I don't understand. Fight your way through all of the enemies in front of you and capture them to turn them into allies who you can command. Okay. I mean, that's interesting, but how long is it going to take us to get to that point? And I can't even... The basic kind of combat interactions, I just can't work out how to do them. And when I do them, it's going to just be like random rolls at each other. So, you know, if you compare this to an Advance Wars game, right? Which, you know, Wargroove was kind of like an indie or sort of pseudo indie recreation of that. When I play Advance Wars, I'm looking at all the stuff on the map and I'm going, oh, that beats that, that beats that, that beats that. And then thinking about what's blocking other things, what's blocking the movement of things, thinking about capture points. There's lots of stuff to think about. And you can prototype one of these as a board game as well. You don't need to program it to work out if the game mechanics work. But this is like, we've done lots of implementation to learn how to make a video game, but the video game isn't video gaming. The video game is not gaming, you know? Because the game is the set of kind of choices that happen in the player's head. And this is not giving me any choices because it's just like, you must kill these 6 guys that are all identical. And if it had been a little bit easier to work out how to get through that section so we could get to the bit of the game where I get to choose some stuff, then great. But it wasn't set up that way, unfortunately. Okay, this has got a name your own price thing, so it's probably just been in the queue for ages. But I'm gonna play it today anyway. So this is called Revenant Realms. I think we're going to finish on some sort of bit more of an action game. It looks like a Llamatron. We're picking characters up and dropping them around in the scene, which is quite cute. I like that. Oh no, wrong. Game made in the Love Engine, I think. Let me see if I can make that a bit easier for people to see. Revenant Realms. Yeah, I think that's what prototyping is. If you view it as a test, right? Like, feasibility testing is a form of prototyping, but it's not really one that you need to get other people involved in, right? So I talked about this at the start. You can be testing for different things. Is the gameplay fun? Is this game fantasy or art appealing? Can I do this, right? So game design, art direction and creative, technical stuff, right? The technical question of, can I do this? Can I build a turn-based tactics game? Can I make a birdwatching game? That's feasibility testing. The data you get to show whether you pass or fail that is completely inherent in the game. You do not need someone else to tell you whether you manage to make a game that does all of the things you expected and doesn't crash. The finding the fun, like the game design prototyping, you do need someone else involved, but you also need some idea of what you're testing and also be open to like just seeing what people find out. So that's kind of like a bit more squishy, but you do need someone else involved. At the same time, when you get to that stage, if you give people a game where you kind of already are aware of all of these problems it has, then you're setting yourself up for a bad test, because you know that they're just going to tell you stuff you already know, right? And that's one of the reasons why, I don't know, like when we put out our game alpha, like back in December, we had to push some optimizations about a week later because loads of people weren't even able to play the game because it ran so poorly for them. And it's like, well, that's not really what I want to be doing at prototype stage, but if it's kind of leading to 10% of the people that try to play the game all having the same problem, then it needs to be fixed. And likewise, if there's some little problem that you know of, like this kind of comes back to that conversation we've been having a lot about how feedback is not polish level juice. So, you know, if players don't know when their character is hurt because you haven't added a sound effect or you haven't made the character flash to, that's the sort of thing that you probably knew already, and you knew it was an issue and you knew people were going to have an issue with it. So why are you wasting your testing time giving people known issues? And then the third type of test, which is like, is this appealing, is something you can test without building a game. So you can mock up a scene from a game, you can mock something up as a piece of art and show it to people. The simplest way of this is the elevator pitch, but the thing is, most people aren't interested in hearing your ideas for games. And the reason for that is kind of like because they're personal, and whether or not you can make the game that you're describing really comes down to who you are. So if you imagine the experience of a random person saying, I've got an idea for a game, it's this, and your response to that, you would probably think, well, I don't know who you are. So although you might have a great idea, I'm not going to get excited about it because I don't know what you can do. Whereas if there's a game developer that you know, if like Ed McMillan or someone says, I've got an idea for a game, and they say the same idea as the other person, you're going to be able to like almost play that in your head because you know what that person's games are like. So there's ways of testing the appeal of something where you just talk about it. But if you just talk to strangers, they're not going to know what you can make. If you can mock something up visually and say, here's my game concept, and you can do a little bit of art and stuff, then you can test the appeal of like the central fantasy of a game and what the player is doing, or like the art style. You'll notice like lots of pixel artists and stuff do this. They just do a full screen mock-up of a game that doesn't exist. Really good way to practice those skills as well. But yeah, I mean, playtesting for the actual game and the usability of the game is where you need other people. If you are just building something to work out whether you can build the thing you want to build, but there's not really anything unique in there to test or anything like that, or, you know, the whole purpose of building it was just to learn to build it, that's not really something where you need to test it with people, because you already get the answers to your questions from yourself, you know? Okay, let's see what this is. Revenant Realms, last one for today. Click and hold the player or an enemy to pick them up and drag them, release to drop them. So we've got a little dungeon keeper dangle. Pick them up and move them around. Nice little kind of squishy. You know, this has got all the kind of UX stuff I would expect this feature to have. We've got the light following the character around. So eyes drawn to them, we pick them up. There's a little squishy kind of feeling. I think I would like a little bit more differentiation when they're dangling, because at the moment it doesn't really look like they're very high above the ground, but that's cool. While held, the player can still attack, but enemies can attack. Okay. Enemies will come in waves. The player will auto-attack enemies in range. Okay, so we're doing a sort of... yeah, we're doing a kind of Vampire Survivors, but we're clicking and dragging stuff to move it around to give ourselves more time and stuff. I can't pick up the torches, alas. Attacking enemies will fill your overdrive bar. Overdrive gives you additional projectile for triggering extra upgrade effects. Okay, tutorial complete. Cool. This is the type of game where we might need the tutorial more because it's in real time and we can't stop and read like little bits around the edge of the screen. But even then, that was nice and short. bats run away from me. Oh. Okay, we don't want too many bats around at once because they're quite fast. Can't pick up the big ones. This is a neat idea. Take the little guy out. Picking them up to dodge a projectile feels pretty good. I know this one is a little bit more polished, so we're having some potentially kind of conflicting ideas about, what state a game needs to be in and stuff. But it really depends on what you're testing, and if your game is about combat and things blowing each other up, then I think your stuff like your VFX approach and your sound approach and stuff are worth testing. One of the things I like about this is the kind of sound and feel is quite mellow. You notice this in a lot of like Node Buster type games, is they have like explosions and stuff because that's what's happening. There's an explosion on the screen, but it'll be more like a puff. It'll be like, and it's kind of a good indicator that the developer understands like the kind of overall emotion that the game is going for. And again, coming back to that issue I said before of like overly professionalized advice being used by hobbyists. It's the same with GDDs, right? Like someone somewhere says, in a game studio, you write a GDD. So people then use that as an excuse to sit down writing a 50-page document for an idea for a game that they don't know how to make because they haven't spent that 50 hours like learning how to do the programming stuff that would be required to make that game, Same with all areas of art and polish. It's like, well, you might think that VFX and stuff don't need to be in an early prototype. They don't need to be good in an early prototype, but they probably do need to be there because they communicate something, right? So if the damage numbers are part of the gameplay, then they need to be there. They don't need to be in their final form. They don't need to be beautiful. But more importantly, if you're still learning game dev as you're making a game, then doing the thing just to learn it and make sure you can do it is just as important. So that might mean you do things like VFX and sound a little bit earlier than people might recommend. But if you still need to practice that stuff because you haven't done much of it, then again, this is part of the reason for the make small games thing, is the quicker you can get through all of the parts of making the game, the easier it's going to be for you to like sort of spec reasonable games for yourself. Because whether you're an individual or a team of people, there are going to be certain things that you are good or bad at making, and you're only going to learn about that by doing stuff and like trying to do all of it. And like let's say you formed a studio tomorrow and you had like 100 people working for you, but rather than just getting stuck in making stuff, you spent like years writing and rewriting pitch documents and stuff rather than making things. The problem is you're never going to be set up to succeed because you don't have you haven't spent any of that time learning what that team can make. And that applies to a team of 100 people, but it also just applies to like one person trying to make stuff on their own, because you have to go with the grain of what you're good at and what you find easier to do. And for some people that's scary because it's like, well, I can't do art, I can't do this type of programming. It's like, well, no one's forcing you to make a video game entirely on your own. That's something you've decided to do. So, if you want to do it well, you either need to practice the skills that you don't currently know, or you need to acknowledge that the types of games you're going to be able to make are going to be severely limited to the things that you're comfortable making, like just accepting the kind of reality of the situation that you've decided to put yourself in, I'll just finish this wave and then have a look at the chat, because I'm very much, this is very it's quite zen. Like, you can zone out a little bit, but it's definitely not a game I can read and play at the same time. Yeah, this is the type of pixel art you could knock out quite quickly. Like, even someone reasonably experienced. This isn't the type of pixel art where I'd be like, oh yeah, this is like a team where they hired someone else to do all the art, you know. The thing that makes it feel polished is stuff like these little breathing animations, the light. You can get a lot of life into a world by doing things with the art assets rather than... what am I trying to say? You can have a very simple, like, 2-frame animation on a piece of pixel art and then do other stuff with it, like squashing and stretching, or... Don't let the purists hear me, but... Oh, that's quite harsh. Felt like there's no window between them spawning and shooting. Yeah, probably is an asset pack. I mean, all of the characters and stuff feel like they go together very well. I'm not sure about having a character in green on a background that's brown and green, but very, very easy to change as well, you know? Yeah, this is quite compelling. I think what I would like is like one more interaction with the click and drag that isn't pick up a character, you know? Because you could potentially get into a lot of fun stuff here with like these rocks being like single shot spells where I can, you know, maybe I put my character over in the corner for a few seconds so that they're safe, and then I pick up a rock and drop it on one of the enemies, you know? That would be a fun thing to get to play around with. Because we've already got this kind of metaphor of there's a big hand that can pick stuff up and drop it. And if we applied that to more objects, you can imagine how we'd quickly have, oh, there's a, you know, maybe the torches don't do anything, but there's a chance that there will be a lantern and I can pick the lantern up and drop it and it sort of sets 9 tiles on fire or whatever. I feel like there's potentially more we can do with this clicky finger than just move the characters. You can also hold the enemies while she shoots them, which is quite cool. Yeah, I think this game would really shine if we had a few more things we could do with the mouse. Oh, you can pick up multiple enemies and put them down in one go. I didn't realize that. So you can go whoop whoop whoop. It's a really good take on this type of game, though. I think I'm quite impressed with what I see here. I really like games where you just have a very, very simple way of interacting with it, but then lots of like potential ways that can play out with different situations. I do think if there were a few more different types of things we could pick up and things that could happen by moving them, you know. It is a bit like Jack's. I just bashed that. Put them under the falling rocks. Okay, so... Oh, I didn't have the timing right that time. So we need to watch for the next yellow bits. Put them under falling rocks. There we go. I mean, if that's a possible thing, it feels like it's a little bit too hard to pull off at the moment. I just got one of them that time. That's great, though. The first few times I saw the warning for the rocks, I was so focused on just not being under there that I forgot that you could probably squish. Yeah, the delay is a bit too big on some of them. Oh, I should have picked them all up and put them on the other side to give myself time to think. It's really good. There's something very, very compelling about this. It's like, it has that quality where it feels like every time I lose it, I come away with another little bit of information about the game, and I can... That's what gives games like that, oh, one more try kind of quality, is like, after I've played it once and I've failed, do I feel like I learned something from that failure, and now I'm like hankering to go back so I can do better because I actually feel like I know how to do better, right? And a lot of the time when people switch off from a game very quickly, it's because the game is, you know, they're failing and they don't know how to get better, or they're winning and they don't know why. That's really unsatisfying, that feeling. I've had that a few times recently on stream where it's like, I seem to be making progress in the game, but I still don't understand it, and I shouldn't be making progress in a game that where I don't really know what I'm doing, you know? Whereas this, it's like, okay, I fail, I die, and I go, oh yeah, I know why I died. Next time I will try this thing differently. I'll do this more, or be careful, watch out for this situation more, or whatever. Yeah, if you hold the snakes, then they can't spit while they're being held, so you can like hold one away. And this is basically what you get when your game has a lot of rich little, a little kind of logical situations, like when this happens, right? So you create, I can't explain this while I'm playing. If you have a lot of rules in the game, in your game, that are very easy for the player to understand in these kind of simple logical sentences, like when this happens, then this happens, or this can't happen when this is happening. If you have a game that is made up of lots of those and they're very easy for the player to like observe and learn, then you have a rich game that is going to be quite compelling that someone wants to play over and over again. In this case, it's kind of easier to create that quality because it's an action game, right? So some of the tactics-based games we played earlier, there's a lot of kind of clunk and stuff that gets in the way of noticing those things because I have to like dig into menus and see what abilities characters have. But for example, in that last run, I learned that, okay, although the bigger spiders and the snakes spit those multicolored orbs at you, and they are like difficult to deal with, if I'm holding one in my little bubble where I pick the enemies up, it can't fire, right? So I can hold one of them at arm's length and shoot it for a little while, but I need to be careful not to put it down because as soon as I put it down close to me, it's going to start firing again, right? That's creating all these little trade-offs that makes the game interesting to mentally process. And I don't know, this is a thing you can't teach. Like I've been like going over and over this as I've been writing my book. There's the kind of, a game is a series of interesting decisions kind of thing. Like, how do you make decisions interesting? Well, players need to understand that they're there, right? They need to understand the situation you're presenting them with. They need to understand the things they can do. in this game, we've made that very easy because the thing that the player can do is actually very simple. And then the complexity of the game is in the situations that emerge from having the enemies that move around differently and stuff like that. But that makes it easier for the gameplay of what I'm experiencing to be about me reading the situation, because the way I can respond to it is very simple. I can only like click and drag. I can only click and drag things, right? So you've got the tools that the player has to interact with the game, right? The player's mechanics of like what they can actually do. And then you've got the situations that the game sets up through encounter design or level design or varieties of enemies or whatever your game has in it. And I tend to find that making the situation that you put the player in like rich and interesting is usually more fruitful than giving the player loads of extra verbs that they can do. Not always. Like sometimes you need a new verb. You need to be able to jump, or you need to be able to shoot, or whatever. You need a new verb. But usually, you know, if I've got the verb to shoot, and that can be used in 4 ways, but that really depends on the situation that the player is in and what's in the room with them and stuff, that usually tends to be a better recipe for success, because a game is a game because of the parts of it that are uncertain. And every time you can kind of create slight variations on a scenario where the player is thinking, oh, what should I do here? Right? Because it's fundamentally different from the last screen they saw or whatever. And someone was just kind of joking that this game looks the same every... I mean, it is, but the thing I have to respond to is everything is in a slightly different place on the screen. So there's a lot for me to kind of dig into as a player when I'm playing this. And I think if we circle right back around to the Goodyear, the birding game at the start, what I want for that game to really shine is for when I'm wandering around looking for birds, that there's other things to potentially distract me, and although I'm looking for the trees and the bushes to rustle, that's kind of why I mentioned that idea of like picking up litter or something as you go. Because as soon as you have things that are competing for your attention, then you have these interesting moment-to-moment decisions of like, oh, I was going to go over to that tree, but now I've noticed this other thing. So I you know, that's how you turn a game of reactions into something that feels a little bit more like you're making decisions. Is just have things kind of competing for your attention that are slightly different. Yeah, the enemies definitely aren't immune to rocks. I'm squishing them. It's just the rocks kind of fall down in an order where some of them might take like a few seconds to fall down after the warning, so you don't always know whether you're putting... As well as always trying to put the cluster of enemies next to like 2 diagonal spaces, because there was a better chance that they'd get squished. One more try. Yeah, and if you've got them in the bubble, I don't think they get hit by the rocks. But yeah, I would still like to be able to pick up rocks and drop them on them. It feels like it would open up a lot. Maybe that's what Overdrive does as well, and we just never unlocked it, because I suck. Whoa. Whoa. Go away. I want these mother-loving snakes out of my mother-loving cave. Yeah, stuff competing for your attention in a game that requires you to handle it slightly different. Very good shortcut to automatically kind of make things feel more interesting. Like, to come back to the birding game and that discussion of those types of games, you know, like life sim type things, whether they're about farming or anything else. The reason the farming ones work is that there's just always too many things to do. So the game then becomes like you make all of these problems for yourself. And in a farm, they're very like physically present and they have a spatial element. So if you lay your farm out in a stupid way, you've created particular types of problems for yourself. And then you have this overarching problem of not enough hours in the day, which is like an annoying problem in real life, but in a game it's quite compelling because now we have too many things to do in any given day and we have competing priorities that we've created for ourselves as part of the game. Same with Animal Crossing, right? Like, the more you develop your island, the less likely it is that you'll ever be able to like pick all of the fruit in a single day. So now the structure of the game and the use of time as a resource has forced you to make decisions every day about what you do, and rather than then having to have the game kick out loads of quests and say, now you need to go and do this, the game structure has allowed the player to kind of create their own need to prioritize what to do next, which is something we often don't like doing in real life, but when we're doing it in a low stakes situation like a game, then we sort of enjoy doing it, and that's kind of how sandbox games work. But you can apply that same thing to like any type of game. You've seen it here in an action game. If you look at the games from earlier and you think about which ones felt like they were already working, okay, how is the game providing a series of interesting decisions? And it's weird to think of reactions as decisions, because this game is a game of reactions, right? I see a situation, I respond to it almost without thinking. But it's the same sort of thing. I'm looking at a situation, I'm judging it. Maybe in a strategy or tactics turn-based game, I'm judging it with a more rational part of my brain rather than gut feel. But it's still that same sort of thing. And if a game has situations to judge which are too complex because the player doesn't understand the game yet or doesn't have enough information to judge the situation, that's going to be overwhelming. But if a player has a situation to judge which doesn't seem to contain any possibility of approaching things in different ways, which is like, you know, the mech game where it's like, you've got one mech, fight these 6 mechs. Does it matter where I go? Not really, right? Immediately I'm put in this space of thinking, well, this is some toys. Some stuff's going to happen, but I'm not, as a player, I'm not mentally processing a set of rules, which is what I go to a tactics game to enjoy. And it's very easy to fall into that trap of like, I think it's when you think in terms of features rather than gameplay, you know, this is what a game has. This type of game has it. You can click on a unit and you take turns and you move a unit and then you fight other units, and you're thinking in terms of features of a game. You never quite get to the point where the game is a game, right? Because the gameplay is a thing that happens when the player is playing the game, and that only happens if the situation that you're presenting them with is giving them interesting decisions to like observe and respond to, and an interesting set of tools with which to do that. And like, if we think of those games from earlier, the mech game just didn't have that quality yet. The very first game, sorry, Art Bunny, I can't remember what the game was called, but the one about the caravan and defending the caravans with the anthropomorphic creatures, it was possible for me to think out loud about that game, and although we found some potential issues with it, that was a game, right? It was a game that I could play and I could think about and I could approach in different ways. Whereas the mech run game, very little there to show me that the developer was making a game rather than a set of UI elements that are required for a certain type of game to exist. And this is why I would always encourage you, if you're making some sort of turn-based game, invest in a copy of Tabletop Simulator, learn how to use Tabletop Simulator. I would always tell people to make paper prototypes, but I've messed around with enough board game designs to know that making them on Tabletop Simulator is actually quicker than like having to do lots of stuff involving printing and scissors and stickers and stuff. So I'll always kind of encourage people to check out Tabletop Simulator. If the games that you're mainly interested in are turn-based strategy and tactics games, that is a really, really helpful prototyping tool. And we've had a game on the channel recently that's a turn-based card game that was built in Tabletop Simulator before Unity, and it really helped to work out what the core of the game is. And I think the developer has had a relatively easy job of building on top of that now that they kind of went into building their Unity game having already had a playable prototype in another format that didn't require them to program something. So yeah, that's today really. I think hopefully people found that useful. I know there were a couple of games where I just checked them out for a moment and then dismissed them, but if the thing doesn't work, you know, if we can't get to the point where we're actually playing stuff, then there's going to be a problem. And I think maybe that discussion about what prototypes are and what they're for could be helpful for some people, you know. When you're playtesting a prototype, if your prototype is just a set of features from that make up a genre of game, which I feel like Guildbreaker is a little bit there at the moment, then you sort of have to think like, what am I trying to get out of testing this? Because people can tell you which bits they find confusing or where the UX needs a tweak and stuff like that. But fundamentally, if they've played another game that your game is based on, you kind of already know that that stuff works. And then it's just like, well, how do I make my game different? How do I make sure that I execute on all of these things really well? I think as soon as you're in the world of like realistically proportioned human beings doing attack animations, then you're really setting yourself up for a certain type of project that might be too challenging. And again, I think the idea of a game being too hard for you to make is fine, as long as you sort of accept that it may be a hobby project and a learning project. And I'm quite sick of seeing people discouraged from making certain types of game because they're too hard, because we all have to learn somewhere. And often it's better to learn by doing things that are slightly too hard for you. It's just important to distinguish that from making games for other people to sell, you know. And the way I put I'm writing a book about this at the moment. I put a metaphor in it the other day that's like, if you were opening a restaurant, right? You're going to practice cooking at home, and you're going to make certain things, and you'll learn from that what you're good at making and what you're not good at making. What you're not going to do is make something experimental for the first time, like a big 12-course meal with all this weird stuff you've never cooked before, and put it in front of people and ask them to give you money for it, right? And there's like a world of shades of grey between those two extremes, but I think a lot of people approach indie dev in that last format where, you know, they haven't really practiced something, they haven't spent time working out what they're good at, and then it's just like, well, I've spent 6 months on this game, I might as well spend 6 months more on it, and then people give me $10, right? And it's like, well, just because it took you a long amount of time doesn't mean that it's like a commercially viable thing, right? Just like the 12-course meal took you a lot of time, you learned a lot of skills. That doesn't mean that people want to eat like 12 courses of burnt food that you kind of made while learning to cook, you know? So yeah, I mean, all stuff to think about. And just remember, a prototype is not the first version of a game you already intend to make. It's there to test out ideas. It's there to see if you can make something, and also to be open to finding things that you and I think this is why you need to test test the parts of the game that you're least sure about, because that's where you will discover things. If you're testing game mechanics that you know work in other games, it's like, okay, well, what are you hoping to learn from this, you know? Thanks for joining today. Thanks, Unknown. Anyone who's new, please subscribe to the channel. If you're watching from Twitch, more active on YouTube. There's video essays and stuff over there. We have a Discord community that's attached to the Patreon. I think today, the first three or four games were games submitted by patrons who just basically I prioritize streaming all of those games. And usually at the moment, I think when someone submits their game that way, I usually get around to it within a month. And then there's the longer list on indiegameclinic.com. There's a form where you can submit games as well. They have to be work in progress games. And I try and include some of those on the streams, although it's a much longer waiting list. So I don't know how long Revenant Realms has been on the waiting. It could have been on the waiting list for a year. I don't know. But that's kind of the way that the channel works. Yeah, thanks for joining today. And also, if you're interested in learning more about game design, we have a podcast called Game Developers Library, which we had a new episode of that went out the other day. Anyone who's interested in procedural generation, we just had a new episode of that podcast. Just refix my window. Mike Cook's book, Next Level, Making Games That Make Themselves, a book about procedural generation in games, was our last book on the Game Developers Library podcast, which a podcast I set up with my friend Tom because I wanted to read more books about games and making games, and I also felt like other people would benefit from having that. So we do a summary of the book we've read, and we talk about how it applies to things we've learned elsewhere in our sort of careers making games and stuff as well. That was a really good book. I very much enjoyed that. It's like a history of proc gen. How long is the list on indiegameclinic.com? That form has like 300 games in it. So what I do is every couple of weeks I go through the form, I tag the games, I pick stuff that I think is interesting, I put them in genre buckets and stuff, and then that means that if someone from the patron community, if I look one day and there's a soccer band game from one of our patrons, then I look in the main list and I go, oh, are there any other soccer band games in this list? And I might find, oh, there's actually 5 soccer band games waiting. And then I'll put a stream on. So the patrons kind of lead everything, really. Like I theme most of the streams around stuff that our patrons are doing, people in our Discord community. And then when I've picked a theme from their games, like we might have 2 patrons games that are both cyberpunk. So pick 2 of them, go back to the main list. Anyone here making interesting cyberpunk games, put them together in a stream. That's loosely how it works. Over on patreon.com, there is a like more in-depth article about how I pick the games. But yeah, that's loosely how it works. So thanks for joining today. Have a good rest of the week. I may stream later in the week to do some work on my own games, but I've tried to keep the stream schedule relatively light this week because the kids are here and they're home from school. So thanks for joining today. Go and check out the podcast. You can also subscribe to the Patreon without donating. There's like a free tier, which is just like the monthly newsletter and occasionally some other free things I put out. So if you're interested in that, but you don't have the money or whatever, go and look at patreon.com/indiegameclinic and just subscribe to the free version for the newsletter. There can be some helpful stuff on there, and you find out about what's coming up in the next month on the newsletter. So I've been trying to schedule. So for example, September's main streams will go up before then. And then when we do September's newsletter, it will tell you about most of the games that are going to be streamed in that month and other stuff that's coming up, like new video essays and podcasts and stuff as well. So, that's enough promotional stuff from me today. Have a good Monday. Thanks to everyone who sent their games in today, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting the channel, and have a great rest of the week.